Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'd like to welcome you to TransLink's open board meeting. I'd also like to acknowledge that TransLink operates in the traditional territories of the Lower Mainland Coast Salish people, and specifically that this meeting is being held in the traditional territory of the Kikite Nation, First Nation. TransLink takes safety of its customers and employees, board members, and the public very seriously. And in that spirit, I'd like to remind you of the location of the emergency exits. The nearest emergency exit is across the hall right here. And in the event of an alarm, please exit in an orderly fashion. You would need to go down to the main floor and meet at the muster station, which is by the construction fence and the building side near the Skytrain. For those using mobility devices, please do not use the elevator, but gather in the vicinity of the stairwell and enter the safe refuge area, and our floor wardens will report your location to the fire department so they can prioritize your safe exit from the building. In the event of an earthquake, please remember to drop, cover, and hold until the shaking has stopped. I'd also like to mention that the Great Shakeout Bc is coming up on October 19th at 10:19 a.m. Millions of people around the world will practice how to drop, cover, and hold, and we encourage you to do the same. It's also a good time to think about preparing for you and your family by developing an earthquake kit and practicing drop, cut, and cover, or drop, cover, and hold at home. And with all the current earthquakes and natural disasters that are happening around the world, I think it's something for us to really take a moment and prepare for. So I'd now like to proceed to our agenda that we have in front of us, and I'd like to call the meeting to order, which I've done. The adoption of the agenda, which is in front of all the board, and I have a motion to receive the agenda and second, and all in favor of approving the agenda as presented. The next item on the agenda is the adoption of our minutes. Our last meeting was on June the 23rd of 2017. I'd receive a motion to approve that. Thank you, Murray. And a seconder. Thank you, Larry. And all in favor of receiving the minutes. Thank you. So we have two public delegations for this morning. And we also have before us the response to the public delegations from our previous meeting. There for you for information that you have received. I just want to make sure that there's no further conversation in regards to the information that we received. So that's there for your information. So the next item is the public delegations. And we have two people. Our first guest is Albert Millennius, and he wants to come and speak on sidewalks, corner ramps, and bus stops as they're created for access transit. So welcome, Albert. Is the button, there's a talk button there, and the light comes on. There we go, someone's gonna, there we go.
You said talk, I thought you said top.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, a couple of preliminary points. First, I tried to take this to the Mayor's Council because one side of it is about sidewalks as a method of accessing bus stops, but they sent me here, so here I am. And the second point, I will send an electronic copy of this to you with pictures attached. I did not print 80 pages of pictures, so I don't have them. Okay, the first presentation. My passengers, like anyone else, will sometimes walk if they have streets that are safe to walk. They also need safe streets to get to forms of transit other than handy-dart. In the past, I informed you that the corner ramps to allow wheelchairs to use crosswalks had been installed with a design flaw. The ramps that led down into the intersection had no high corners to prevent blind people from walking diagonally into the middle of the intersection. Some of your staff members have since told me that the problem has been dealt with. I don't doubt their honesty, but the problem is only beginning to be resolved. Attached to your email, when you get it, you will find the pictures of Broadway and Commercial, one of the most important intersections in BC. One of the corners has a raised corner to prevent people from straying into the intersection. The rest are the old ramps that lead diagonally into the middle of the intersection. After that are three corners from Austin and North Road. They all have a tactile strip to indicate where the sidewalk ends and where the intersection begins. That's the yellow strip like the ones at the edge of the Skytrain platform. However, in the first two, if you walk straight down the center of the tactile strip, you'll be walking into the intersection, not the crosswalk. And the next one, you will see that if you walk through the center of the strip, you'll be walking down the center of the crosswalk. It seems to me that to be effective, every strip should have the same configuration and that a line through the center of the strip should lead to the center of the safe crosswalk. But don't ask me, ask a blind person. And that's my whole point. The ramps could have been done right the first time 40 years ago if there had been full consultation with the users. If you want better custom transit, have the riders evaluate every aspect on a regular basis, not once in a while in an advisory capacity, but on a regular basis as part of the decision-making process. It would be a far better process than trying to figure out who to exclude from Handy-Dart. And excluding people from Handy-Dart is really a difficult and messy task. It's bound to create protests. The second one is much more general. Upcoming changes at Handy-Dart. Handy-Dart needs improvement, and improvement must be built on stability. The riders need stability, the employees need stability, the politicians need stability, the TransLink staffers need stability, the TransLink board needs stability. I see no need for a major change in Handy-Dart till a new model can be developed. The way to do that is to give the riders and the employees more effective input into how the system runs. And that's what the stuff about the sidewalk was about. Combining Handy-Dart with Coast Mountain would make us pawns in every Coast Mountain strike. Going to a new contractor would make us relive the MBT opening fiasco one more time. It would be deja vu all over again. I negotiated 23 years without a strike. Things can be worked out. And I didn't put this in writing, but things can be worked out if you accept the riders into your decision-making process. And that one of your staffers just told me that there's an RFP about that. You want to do a better liaison with the riders. I didn't realize you were doing that, but if you are doing that, that's a good idea. You need to bring them in and ask for their advice regularly. And the old advisory committees were advice. They were not, is my time up? Okay. The old advisory committees were advisory. You need them to be participating in decision making. They can't run TransLink, but they could help you run their corner of TransLink. And I'll give copies of this to are those the people to give them to? Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Albert. And I'd like to invite Grant Rice up now.
Thank you. My name is Grant Rice. I live at 10378 125A Street in Surrey. I'm here to speak about the South of Fraser Transit project update.
Great.
So I think you have a little prelude, and it was very difficult with all the character limits to get it out there right. But what I'm looking for is what information that TransLink knows. So just to start off with a rhetorical question, how can a green infrastructure project such as 104th Avenue LRT cause such devastating effects on our environment? So far we're losing parks, tree canopy, and soon to be an ancient bog will be removed. These are just a few of the consequences of the 104th LRT project. Citizens have been kept in the dark as to the details of the project. It took us several FOIs in 8 weeks to obtain environmental reports on the project called 105 Avenue Connector. Citizens had to print forms, and our ability to collect signed electoral response forms was impeded by the city's repeated, the city of Surrey, that is, their repeated kicking us off of public property. We had to get legal opinion from the West Coast Environmental Law to allow us access to collect these forms. The city asked us to collect 30,372 forms. We collected approximately 13,000, a little bit short of where we were heading. So Council, through its Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, was aware of this project, the 105 Avenue Connector, in November, at least as early as November 2006, and then the Parks Advisory and Environmental Committees were appraised of this in February. The community wasn't notified until March, but when we look back at records, we found a reference from a corporate report of June 27, 2016. And one of the things that it says in that is that although two travel lanes on 104th Avenue will be converted to LRT in the short term, the ultimate goal will be to reestablish 4 general purpose travel lanes on 104th Avenue through road dedications acquired at the time of redevelopment. So the city has doubled the width of 100th Avenue through Green Timbers Urban Forest, causing massive devastation. Now they're planning on putting a road through Hawthorne Park and through a school playing field. So this LRT project, which is supposed to be green infrastructure, which is supposed to take cars off the road, is causing ripple effects that are devastating to Surrey's ecological system. So Surrey has already doubled the width of 100th Avenue, and I'm wondering why does the city, and by association its partner TransLink, feel the need to destroy a sensitive ecosystem in Hawthorne Park and ultimately destroy a heritage school along the same route? So my questions, I have several here. When was the LRT project plan, including station plans for the 104th Avenue, finalized? So that would be something that maybe your staff would be able to respond to. Can TransLink confirm when discussions with the City of Surrey and the school district commenced on the realignment of the 105 Avenue Connector project? The school district has claimed, both their Board of Trustee chair and the superintendent of schools in Surrey have claimed to have known about this for 5 years, and the community only found out in March. Can the TransLink board please direct staff to disclose all information they have regarding environmental impacts of the 104th Avenue LRT project and to the impacts on Jorth Road School, Hawthorne Rotary Park, and Green Timbers Urban Forest? The other thing that was really galling is that the City of Surrey launched the AAP process 2 hours after hearing from a delegation with 5,000 signatures from the Save Hawthorne Park group. So my next question to TransLink is TransLink and other regional taxpayers and transit users on the hook for any of the costs associated with mitigating the environmental damage to Surrey's parks or to the capital costs of a new playing field and school at Jorth Road's elementary school? In the September 7th Memorandum of Understanding between the City of Surrey and TransLink, it states the project will help reduce traffic congestion and increase transit network capacity to help meet the transportation goals for the region. Further, under that MOU, joint roles and responsibilities, that's the heading, it says TransLink and Surrey will be full partners in public community relations during the project development and construction. And I'm hoping that you don't go down to the bar that the city set for you, that you raise the bar so that they come up to TransLink's methods of responsibility to the community.
Thank you, Grant.
Thank you.
I can't answer all of your questions now. What I would suggest, you might want to speak to Sandy Zane, right there. Sandy is, his department's responsible for developing the light rail project. As relates to 105th and the park, I think you know, I think that the city staff have told you that is a city project. It's not directly related to the light rail project. The extent to which it has a relationship, I think there's a utility issue associated with the city's plans that are affecting the park in 105th. They have a public process, and I would continue to direct you to that public process. That said, we do have environmental review responsibilities for the full light rail project, and Mr. Zane can talk to you a little bit about that. Our next public outreach, public engagement opportunity for the Surrey Light Rail is at the beginning of next year. I think the January-February period. Again, Mr. Zane can give you a little more information about when that is and how you can be involved in that.
Just to point out, though, that the city is saying that the 105 Avenue connector is linked specifically to the LRT project.
Well, that's not my understanding from the city. In fact, my understanding from the city is that the 105th project has been something under consideration for quite a long time. There are relationships, but it is an independent project that the city has to connect their various different grids, the street grids. So again, Mr. Zane, I think, can walk you through what the relationships are and where the city project kind of ends and the light rail project begins.
Okay. So just one further thing, the Surrey School District, the Superintendent Jordan Tinney wrote a letter, a briefing note, and trustees had him pass it on to City Council, asking for not only a replacement playing field, but because of all this road structure in the station, the LRT station being located near the school, that they are creating an island. So this school will be an island surrounded by roads and a station. And what's going to happen is that it's going to be severed from the community. And Jorth Road School, what they're asking the city to do now is, in the short term, replace the playing field in something $2 to $5 million, but in the long term, provide the land and capital structure to replace the school, probably in the $30 to $35 million range. So this whole project has gone off the rails, so to speak, to use an analogy of light rail. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to also mention that we received a written submission that would be considered in part of this, and it was from a resident of Langley, and it was in relation to the Langley truck route for the MRN. So that will be deferred or presented to staff to respond to, and we'll be receiving a report on that for our next board meeting. So that concludes the section for the public delegations, and I'd like to now invite Kevin Desmond, our CEO, to provide a report in regards to the organization. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everybody. Got a number of items which I'll go through relatively briefly. These last few months have been certainly a very active period for TransLink. The summer usually is a time to everybody take their breath, but we've been very excited to be working with the new provincial government, particularly on advancing the mayor's 10-year plan agenda. That the new government has sent all the signals at various different levels of complete alignment with the plan going forward. They've made many public statements in terms of wishing to see the mayor's plan move forward and commence. So we've been very excited to work with the new government, get them up to speed on the program and the scope of the program and the timing that the mayors and TransLink are looking forward to. Probably the most urgent and most important project that we've been engaging with the province on is the Patello Bridge. That remains TransLink's top capital program priority. Well documented that the structure needs to be replaced and a new structure in place by 2023. The business case, the draft business case, was submitted to the province at the end of August, beginning of September. That is under review now. We are hopeful to come up with an understanding with the province on how to fully finance the bridge so we can move forward and commence a procurement process by the end of this year. That would keep us on target to have a new bridge in place by the beginning of 2023. The new government's position on tolling has somewhat complicated, of course, the project, as TransLink and the mayors had envisioned that the project would be primarily financed by toll revenue. So that has been part of the discussion and complicated discussion we're having with the province now. But we remain optimistic that in the weeks ahead we will arrive at an understanding with the province on how to move forward to finance the bridge so that we can move to replacement. On the tolling topic, as you know, the province on September 1st removed the toll from the Port Mann Bridge, and they began working with us in mid-August to come to terms with removing the tolls on the Golden Ears Bridge, which is a TransLink property. We entered into an agreement with the province before the September 1st date, where the province will be keeping TransLink whole. That is not only one-time cost of removing the tolls, but also going forward in terms of projected toll revenue in the future. So that was a satisfactory outcome, at least from a financial perspective, on the Golden Ears Bridge. Topically, what of course I think has been a topic of media attention and something we're looking at closely from a planning perspective, over the first few weeks since the removal of the tolls, we've seen some interesting, although somewhat predictable, trends on 3 of the bridges. The Golden Ears Bridge has seen about a 28% increase in daily traffic. The Port Mann Bridge has seen about a 25% increase in daily traffic, which I believe equates to roughly 30,000 additional car trips daily on the bridge. On the other side of the equation, the Patello Bridge has seen about a 12% reduction in overall traffic. Again, this was fairly predictable when the Port Mann Bridge was tolled in the first place. Traffic on the Patella Bridge and then here in New Westminster and through Surrey did increase. So these are early days. It's early information. Anecdotally, we're understanding that drivers on Port Mann, while they're not paying, are also spending more time in traffic. And I do believe, from a public dialogue perspective, that really understanding how to manage traffic and congestion and the capacity of our very overused roadways is really the topic of the day. And I think the mayors and the board's independent mobility pricing commission will begin to tackle that very topic going forward. So this sort of reverse experiment, if you will, and the removal of the tolls is in some ways very timely. Moving on to the 10-year plan, as I said, we're very excited and encouraged on our dialogue with the new provincial government. During the summer in June, we held additional public meetings on the Surrey Light Rail project and the Millennium Line extension. Something like 1,300 people attended various different public open houses. Several thousand people engaged with us online on the project. And as I mentioned earlier, additional public consultation will take place next year on both projects. We otherwise do remain on target with everything that we have so far promised, at least in phase 1 of the 10-year plan, the first 3 years. You'll be hearing from Hayden Atchison in a couple minutes in his report on the most recent 105,000-hour increase in bus service. We're on target by the end of the year to increase bus service by some 200,000 hours. And Hayden will give you some more of the details on that. Exciting for us, and the juxtaposition of the ability to start expanding service fairly robustly this year with the help of the mayors and this board is we're seeing a very, very strong ridership increase in our system. Jeff Cross will speak to this a little bit later in his report, but at an overview level, through August, ridership is up 6.2%. Overall journeys are up 5.7%, with boardings through August 270 million, which would put us on target to exceed 400 million boardings here at TransLink in another record year going forward. Clearly, a strong economy is driving that. We do believe that service expansion is also driving that. The Evergreen extension has clearly increased boardings on the Expo Millennium Line. Also, with that 6.2% increase in ridership or boardings, farebox revenue is up 9.4%. So we continue to see a disproportionate increase in farebox revenue even to the ridership. Some of that remains the reduction in fare evasion once the gates were closed a year ago in the system. But also, I do believe that behavior patterns and how people are using our system because of the Compass product itself is helping to drive some of that revenue boost. We had a fun time at the end of August celebrating the 1 billionth tap of Compass on August 23rd. I would have really loved to have presented some kind of award to the 1 billionth person if we could actually have identified the actual individual. But we had some fun with that. We did some publicity around the 1 billion. I asked my staff how long it took McDonald's to sell 1 billion hamburgers. It took them 2 decades. So we did Compass in just a couple of years, just for sake of reference. Capital projects, a few notable events on the capital side with 3 of our station renovations, long-term projects. Metrotown, we opened up the West Station House at long last with 4 new escalators for better flow. So if you haven't been out to the station, you can really start seeing what that station is going to look like when it is finished. There's still a lot of work to be done. I believe we're slated for Metrotown to be opened up around mid-year next year. With Metrotown, but we really appreciate the patience that our customers have had. That station's been very constrained by the construction, but you can really begin to envision what it's looking like. Next week, we're slated to open up the East Station House of the Joyce Collingwood Station. Again, another project under long-term construction. Glass paneling to improve visibility, new elevators and escalators to improve vertical flow, a bike parkade, internal bike parkade. And so that station is really starting to look very nice. Phase 2, which would be on the West Station House, and the bus loop will begin later this year. Lastly, Commercial Broadway has been in the news lately, last weekend and again this weekend. Very significant disruptions to the roadway, thanks to working with Vancouver Transportation staff to help manage around the work. This is to put the major structure of the new pedestrian crossing over Broadway in place. It entailed a fairly significant set of road closures and detours last weekend, and over this weekend, I think one block on Broadway is going to be closed from Friday night through late Saturday night, I believe, Sandy, correct? Going forward. And that's to basically put a 30,000 pound structure in place over the roadway. So pretty significant milestone. There's still a way to go with that station, but while it is disruptive for motorists going through the region as well as some of our transit customers, it does signal progress on the program. On the access transit front, a number of developments. Hayden will also speak to some of the operational improvements we continue to make. A handy dart related to the advisory committee recommendations. We are making good progress on installing the proximity gates. We've talked about that quite a bit here at the board. Three stations on the proximity gates are already operational at Burrard, Edmonds, and Production Way. By the end of October, 6 more stations will be installed, and we remain on target to have the entire system installed with the proximity gates by middle of next year. We continue to consult extensively with potential users and support folks on how best to use the proximity gates, and that would include whatever eligibility procedures we need to put in place, as well as what devices we would give to the customers who would benefit from the proximity gates. So we're hopeful in the next couple of months to have that pinned down, working with our customers. We are expecting the RFP for Handy Dart. Mr. Millennius spoke about that a few minutes ago. The RFP closed on September 15th, and we'll be coming back at the December meeting with our proposed approach to the Handy Dart operation. So that the RFP review is ongoing. Through the Users Advisory Committee, the Standing Users Advisory Committee that look at all things accessibility, we've established a new subcommittee of Handy Dart riders. So again, Mr. Millennius, I think, reflected on that a little bit. That was one of the recommendations, as well as the advisory committee. So we are looking for various different ways to more directly engage actual riders and users of the Handy Dart program. And again, Hayden will also speak to some of the other operational improvements we've been making or pursuing for Handy Dart. Lastly, a couple of customer service items. They're small, but they're kind of important. Last week, we improved our texting alert system, where you can now receive text via email and your SMS texting with any carrier. There is a problem with at least one of the carriers and their ability to get the alerts that we put out. So we're delighted to get that taken care of. And as well, we put out a new mobile and desktop alert page for our website for folks to gain access to the alert system. These are just elements of a multi-dimensional program that we have in place to improve the digital conveyance of customer information. Lastly, next month, which is next week, we expect to commence our Vanpool program with C-SPAN. We've entered into a partnership with C-SPAN, a major industrial business on the North Shore, and with Moto Car Share, which I think makes for a fairly interesting relationship to really start developing new mobility options for people here in the Lower Mainland, particularly oriented towards businesses and business parks, where it's somewhat remote from the fixed route system and is not easily accessible, at least efficiently, from the fixed route system. And the partnership with Moto kind of adds the dimension that when the vehicles are not in use, they could then be in use as a car share type of system. So it's going to take a while, I think, to build interest in this. In fact, I saw the president of C-SPAN just last night at an event, and they remain very committed to try to market this and work with their employers. And we're going to continue to talk to various different employer groups and elsewhere about how Vanpool might be a solution for their mobility needs. That's my report.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Murray, I think I noticed your hand.
Thanks, Lorraine. Kevin, I just wanted, were there complementary numbers, you'd quoted numbers, increases in traffic volume on the bridges as a result of the toll removal? Have we got any preliminary numbers on, like, the Skytrain ridership across the river?
I think it's a little too soon for that. Jeff could probably speak to that a little bit when he's up to talk about ridership. We're looking at that keenly. Our models did suggest there might be something of reduction in demand on SkyTrains and some of the bus routes. I did see Hayden actually sent me some information the other day about the 555. And actually, at least over the last couple of weeks, I think boardings are actually up a little bit, which might not have been necessarily expected. But that does speak to, you know, people may have a price point on their travel, but they also have a tolerance for sitting in traffic, sitting alone in their car. So it will take a little time, I think, ultimately to tease out what the traffic impact is. It is still very early, and what impact it might have on demand in the system.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, Marcella.
Just a couple of things, if I may. The first one is on the Evergreen line, and perhaps Jeff will address it later. Are we meeting the targets that we had at this point in time since the opening of Evergreen, exceeding them on track?
I'll let Jeff respond to that. The targets are set in a multi-year period. So again, the service has been in place for less than a year. Last numbers I've seen, we're still at the 30,000 plus daily boardings. On Evergreen, I believe the number was 70,000 boardings within, I forget how many years, within about 5 years.
Thank you.
Notably as well, I think, and this is, I think encouraged me in terms of how Evergreen is going to settle in as a real important transportation feature in the Tri-Cities area, is the bus service as well. You know, we reoriented a lot of bus service, and Evergreen replaced a lot of bus service, the B line, but the connections that we created to feed the Evergreen extension, I think, are behaving quite well. Okay. So when you see then the changes in land use out there and the development that the cities, Port Moody and Coquitlam, have around that rail line, I'm convinced, just like the other corridors, Millennium Line, Expo Line, that the future will be very bright for the Evergreen extension.
Thank you. And I just had a second one, and this one perhaps Vivian will address, which is the issue of the service disruption yesterday. So
Vivian will be covering that in her remarks, yes.
Yeah. Any other questions for Kevin before we move on and hear from Vivian? Okay, hearing none, I'd like to invite Vivian up. Welcome, Vivian. You've had a busy day over the last couple of days, or over yesterday anyway.
Yes, I think all my staff have been very busy, so thank you for that first question, and I would like to address that if that's okay, because I know I'm reporting on the second quarter of the year, but there are a couple of items that affect our customers, and I wanted to sort of share with the board what we're doing about that. The first one was the disruption of last night, and the second one is the noise elements that we had in the Evergreen, and I'd like to talk to you about both of those. So let's start off with last night. I mean, I think the board knows me fairly well, and I know Kevin knows me very well. It disappoints me incredibly when we cannot get our customers home. You know, they've got loved ones, they want to go to dinner, they want to take their kids out to sports, and whatever it is that takes us from point A to point B. So, and I know my team feel exactly the same way. So they have been doing a debrief over the evening, and they're pulling together all the information. So I'd like to report on what I know so far, and what we're going to be doing in the very early stages, but also what we might learn as we go through the process. So last night's delay was caused by a failure of a switch, a part of a switch. Now normally if that was not in peak and we got our people out there in between trains, we may have been able to sort of solve it within the sort of, you know, the 50 odd minutes, which is about what you would take for, you know, and I'm sure there will be engineers in our audience that might, you know, talk to me about that. So it was in peak, which is a really hard time to get trains in between trains, and we had to get our guys out to have a look at what was going on. We then decided that we needed to isolate that switch, and we needed to power down to do that. One of the things about an automatic railway is that we need to make sure that trains are in a safe position, people around our system are in the safe position, and our staff have the access to manage that. So it took longer than what we would normally expect it to take. We've also looked at the number of people around our system, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword because we have great ridership at the moment, and I'm really proud to say how many people we move every single day. But when we have a delay like this, we have to manage the crowding on stations because of safety. And so I actually did a radio interview this morning where I was explaining that, if we were unfortunately to have something that delayed our trains, we will always look at the safety of our customers as well as our staff. So that's why we had to close the grids down on some of the stations to sort of minimise the flow through, and that we kept the trains moving as best we could. We also put a bus bridge in, which is an expression of, putting some complementary buses in. Unfortunately, again, being peak, our busing company can only give us so much because their resources are out on the road. But also, if I take people off trains, put them on buses, a train takes about 5 or 6 amount of people than a bus does. And so I'd put them out in traffic and they'd sit there. I happened to be at the depot yesterday and in the evening, and I went up to our control centre. It's always good to see the heart of the railway. And I am pleased to say, even though our customers may not have seen the activities, but their first priority was to keep those trains moving as best they could, because we know that, people understand systems have issues, but if we can communicate well with them, we can keep them moving. There was a very complex operating pattern, definitely, and my operations team are looking at whether there was any flexibility that we could do that differently. But I explain it as the highway, and Kevin was just talking about the traffic on bridges. A railway can be very similar in the sense that you can't move a train until you get to the equivalent of an off-ramp. Which we call switches and crossovers. So that was our issue, that we had to move the trains within those parameters. And so, every 10 to 15 minutes we would be able to bring a train in, but we'd have to cycle those through. The other thing that I've asked my team to look at is the way we communicated. As a user of transit, I'm probably an educated user, so I understand that sometimes there will be delays. But if I don't hear what's going on, I get pretty peeved. I really do. So I can imagine what my customers feel. So we're looking at the way we communicate across the network, how we use the available infrastructure. We do have some great capital programs that Seni is working on for us to improve the tools that we have available to us. But all in all, the debrief will cover communications, how we manage the crowds, the root cause of the failure. So we know it was a part of the switch mechanism, and my engineers will be looking at the other switches within the system to make sure that they're not impending failure. So that's where we're at the moment, and my objective is to keep people moving, get them where they need to be in a very safe manner, and help our staff do the best job they can.
Thank you, Vivian. I have a couple questions in relation to that. So why don't we take a break, and Janet and then Larry would like to speak.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. I'll be quick. First of all, I just want to thank you and give you credit for your very strong emphasis on safety in terms of dealing with the crowding on the platforms.
Thank you.
That's not always understood, I think, but I know that that's very strong in your culture and the culture of the team, and I really appreciate it. Secondly, I wanted to pursue the question of the what was the precipitating incident? Like, is it a common thing for switches to fail? And this may be a difficult technical answer, and it may be something that's a random event, but I mean, the real question is there a way to predict this? Is this something that could have been prevented or could be prevented in future?
Yeah, look, there's all sorts of technology that we could put on our system as time goes by to help us be more predictive. At this point in time, switches will fail. It was a very unfortunate situation of time, place this time round, and the procedure that we use is a procedure that's not often used because we don't turn off the power and do what we did last night to isolate this switch to make sure that we could keep trains running. So that was one of the things that we're learning very quickly, is this is a procedure that's not often used. Now, it was applied very well. Textbook application, which was great, but a couple of things that my team have already come up with, and I need to sort of validate this with them. One was that we're going to do briefings to all our technical staff so that they can learn from this procedure that we don't use very often. So that was the first thing. Good knowledge means that maybe you can, shorten the time of delay, so that could be a positive outcome. But the other thing is about equipment and where we place equipment. So again, it's like insurance. You work out what level of insurance you need. So one of the recommendations from my engineering department this morning was that we look at key areas across the network that have these switches, that we might look at equipment lockers, appropriately sealed and managed, that we could put some equipment closer to these pieces of infrastructure. And again, it's about minimising that delay. These are not things that fail all the time, but they are moving parts, and when you have moving parts, you are deemed to fail at time. And all the maintenance that they do, the preventative maintenance, is to minimise those impacts and that occurrence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Larry?
Well, I just wanted to say publicly something that we were told this morning and have you confirm that. And it's really two things. One is that this was a truly random kind of event, that it's not something that is endemic to the switch system or the technology or anything like that. And two, that this was not a particularly old switch, that it's not that the system is antique and, out of date or anything. It was literally a random event, and that the average user, is not going to all of a sudden expect to see this regularly. And can you confirm that just publicly?
The first one I can say, the reason we're doing the root cause analysis is because it does seem random. We don't know why it failed. Normally, my engineers can say, oh, it was that part, or, and that was the last time we touched it, or what have you. So so the root cause analysis is really important to us. So I have to defer that to my engineers. Am I worried that we're going to have systemic failure across the area? I don't believe so. We do have a good maintenance regime. Our people do inspect this equipment. I unfortunately can't tell you when it was last touched, but my VP of operations is here, and I'll see if he could, my engineering VP, I've got his attention. Could we have a look at when we might have touched that switch last? 2 weeks ago? Okay, so so it would seem random.
Okay. Thank you, Vivian. Anne?
Just 2 quick points. Thank you for that good report. I assume that we're in dialogue with the supplier as well to share learnings and have their what they can learn from this as well.
Yeah, and as soon as we finish our root cause, we definitely would reach out to the appropriate people to do that.
Great. And secondly, just to commend you about the focus on locking out an electrified system when you have workers. And I never want to send the message to workers that we're so keen on getting people to home, although that is a priority, that we're willing to expose workers or anyone to an electrified system. And this is a good time to review as well your lockout procedures and reinforce with people that we're, no matter what the media is, that we need to lock out electrified systems when anyone's working around power. So
thank you, Ian. I really appreciate that. That was certainly the message of last night. We were not rushing. We knew we had people on the system. We were maintaining the safe crowd management. And, I don't want to delay our customers beyond what needs to be, but I will keep everyone safe under my watch.
Thank you. Gregor?
Yeah, I appreciate your responses on all this. I know all of us obviously concerned when there's a breakdown like that and the impact that it has on everyone using the system. Question would be, is there room for improvement with respect to trying to get people from A to B, the bus bridges? I know that's been the practice over the years, to try and get some buses there to move people, but when it's downtown traffic at rush hour, people aren't going to move very fast on buses either. So I'm curious if we've looked at what other cities do, and the odd time when you get a breakdown like this that's unpredictable, which
we have to expect some of that's going to happen. Are we at best practice? Is this the best we can do, or are we still looking at options for moving people when there is a breakdown?
One of the things I think I've briefed the board before is that Rail is a member of Comet Nova, which is a benchmarking group for railways around the world. We share information, we look at how people do incident response, how we move people. Are we world's best practice? That's a really good question, Mayor. Bus bridges are usually the way to go. You usually supplement your disrupted service. You have plans that do that. We work very closely with our busing family, and they provide whatever they can at the time. For moving people, it is always restricted to the network that you have, where you have crossovers, etc., etc. So I think, is there things to learn? Absolutely, and that's why the debrief is really important. I have a strategy where I say to my people, just give me first reports. Even if it's not right yet, just tell me what you think you know. That helps us make, sort of quick decisions to be able to adjust. But it's the debriefs that we get over the next, 2 to 3 days over a week that gives us the real essence of where we could focus in and whether there is improvement and being able to look at what other people do. So I'm looking forward to that. It is a practice that we do, not just because it was public, but because it delayed our services, and we need to look at how to continually improve. I hope I answered your question, Mayor.
Yeah, that's very kind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All
So
right.
Vivian, would you like to continue on with the rest of your report now?
Yes, because I've actually melded the Evergreen information as well into my report.
Great.
So I'll try to keep it fairly brief because I assume that it has been read.
Yes.
As normally, I always talk about our performance, and you'll see that there's a little orange number there, which I don't like. I like to see everything green. But it is also about timing. So there is a little bit of the impact of the bad weather and the delays that we had in the first quarter. So I've asked my team to just keep an eye on that. So, but I do know between April and June that our on-time performance is back up to 98.5. So well and truly, over target. So I'm very pleased to report that. But it is for quarter two, and I'd like to represent the figures as they are. The next one is that, of course, state of good repair is very important to us, keeping our system operational and safe so that we can keep our services out there for our customers. I'm pleased to report that we have a turnout replacement program, and we've completed 5 out of the 7 that we're due to replace this year, and that's all on time. So again, this is about preparing the railway, making sure that it stays within a good state. We've also done the rail grinding. So with the rail grinding, we have over the Expo line and Columbia Station, which is what the focus was this quarter. And that leads very nicely to my sort of update on I've actually got one out of order. That's why I'm stumbling. So let me just get back into sync. My apologies for that. So that's about the turnout replacement. So we've replaced 3 turnouts in quarter 2, and our team is on track for doing that on time. So my apologies for this. I seem to have an outdated presentation. My apologies. Let me just talk to. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so let me just start again. State of good repair, all of our programs are on time, mainly for rail grinding and the rail replacement and the switch change-outs. We also have the ultrasonic testing on the entire system to look at defects, and so that's about the preemptive maintenance that I was just talking about, to be able to identify where we might have upcoming issues, and we can get in there and make sure that our system is where it should be. The customer experience and performance reporting, I reported it last quarter that we'd redesigned our structure and we'd put some much more emphasis on the customer experience and also on performance reporting. And I'm really pleased to say that in the short time that our director has been here, she has been out and about talking to our customers, talking to our staff. And one of the things that she's working with our staff on is what we call the now, I think it's called the Falcon Pilot. Why is it called the Falcon Pilot? We've had a lot of complaints around the sort of Millennium Line area about pigeons. Now, apparently this has been, okay, so the locals are nodding. Apparently this has been a real issue because they're homing pigeons. So there's only so many things you can do, and you know, obviously have to be very aware of, you know, animal conditions and things. So what they're doing over 6 stations is they're going to be using a tethered falcon. So apparently the idea is, through the nature of these birds, is if they know, they sense the falcon. And so they'll come back a few times, and once they understand the falcon's there, they do actually go and find another place to roost. So we're hoping that that will help with some of the situation. It's been complaints of, you know, health and wellness, staff having to constantly clean areas for our customers, and so it's something that we can't really ignore, but it's quite a challenging one. So through our Director of Customer Experience, going out, talking to people, you know, talking to the operations staff, we've come up with this trial. So that's been really, really good. We've also introduced what we call visual management centres. And what this is about the performance indicators of the organisation. And you start from the very top. And so all the indicators that you see in our reports and digging down into each of the areas, we now have a room called the Visual Management Centre. And so the first step is you have a performance report which you see every month, and then every week we as executives of the railway will go in and look at our performance on a weekly basis. We talk across our groups to ensure that the groups are helping each other. So, you know, in the sense of we're coming up to winter, and so we know slips, trips and falls are a hazard around our system. Communication, education, and the type of things that you look at normally. But also we'd be looking at our maintenance people to say, well, how are we going to clear the snow? How are we going to manage the ice? How are we going to work together? And so by the two groups coming together and working that through, and then linking that with our colleagues in busing, where we have interchanges that we work together on, how do we make sure we keep that environment really active? And so that's the sort of thing that we concentrate on. And the other thing that we concentrate on is, you know, for example, I don't have the noise one there. I'm going to go to the noise. So Evergreen Noise is another one where we would be looking at the complaints that would be coming in. We would have seen a spike, and we would start to look at that in a more proactive way. So that's a good segue into Evergreen. So as you know, we did have increased complaints about the noise in Evergreen. Again, my engineering group, I went to them and said, you know, what have we done recently? Is there anything that may have caused that? What we had done is recently ground the new rail, which is what was planned to do within a year of it starting up. And so we had some increased noise, and the contractor advised us to wait a little, because it is quite natural that you will get a slight increase and then it will settle. Unfortunately, this did not settle in the way we would have expected it to, even though the contractor was advising us to be patient and wait. But unfortunately, we can't do that. Our neighbours, you know, we need to be good neighbours, to put it very bluntly. And so we went in and they reground. We even did a little bit of spot grinding. I'm very pleased to say that the noise within that area is dropped significantly. That's been sort of supported by the drop in complaints, and we're keeping a close eye on it. Now, we didn't do anything different. This is something that we do all the time. So again, the engineers are just talking to the experts, finding out whether there is anything in particular that we can be aware of. But the methodology is not experimental. We didn't do anything really different. But we'll keep an eye on that. We always do have noise issues around the railway. I think I've said before, you know, steel on steel will make noise. Our job is to make sure we minimise that, we maintain the railway effectively as best we can. I'm going to preempt the question of, you know, what's the standard for noise? When we have a lot of municipalities, there are different standards. So I know that people are talking to the right people to see what is feasible. But right now it's about maintaining the system. So, and I'm just sorry about that bit of a mix-up. I had it all beautifully, even pictures of me out with my staff. I actually did my VP of operations and myself went out and did a shift with our staff. We put on the uniform, and we picked I think it was a 2:30 p.m. to a 2:30 a.m. So we did everything that our staff do. We opened stations, closed stations, and we did hours of single tracking. Now that was quite an experience because we try to keep people moving, but it's not the seamless process that you would like to be able to deliver. So hats off to my staff and everyone involved in delivering the transit every single day across TransLink, because, you know, it's not an easy job, and I think they do a great job. Thank
just
you.
Relative to the noise issue on the rail, Sani and Vivian will be coming back in a little while for a more in-depth
Yes.
report.
Yeah.
So you might, if you have questions specific to Evergreen, might be a good time, but otherwise more broadly, we might wait until Sani comes up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Vivian on the balance of her report? Vivian, I wanted to ask you about your mystery shopper comments that are in your written report.
Yes.
And about the favorable results that were predominantly attributable to improvements to the station's upkeep. So what's that about?
Mystery shopper is a mystery to me. I think, you know, one of the things that I did sort of stomp my feet when I first came here is I went, this station is dirty, this station needs to be clean, this station needs to be... And look, it is all relative because it depends on where you come from. You know, if you have a look at the New York system or the Washington system, ours is pristine in comparison. Again, you know, I talked to my maintenance people, talked about what we do with our contract. I know that the contract administrator is out and about on a very regular basis. So I'd like to think there is a correlation. I haven't asked that direct question, but I certainly will be. And if our customers are seeing that, I think it is about, you know, it's about attention to detail. It's about not walking past what you think, you know, you shouldn't accept. Sometimes it's not feasible to change overnight, but if we get that constant feed of let's improve this, let's not put up with it, we start to get people's attention. And so I think, you know, that is linked to cleanliness, and, you know, maybe me picking up some papers might help too. But it is very much about the keeping the environment clean, tidy, and, you know, what would the customer think if they saw this? I often say that.
Great, thank you. Well, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Vivian. I know you'll
Sorry
be
I
back
went
later
over.
when we do our noise report. So
Thank you.
So the next gentleman I'd like to invite up is Hayden Hashison, and he is the president and general manager of the Coast Mountain Bus Company. And I warned him before we were going to make his life miserable here this morning.
It's miserable enough.
Hayden, you didn't say that out loud, did you? Hayden, an excellent report, please. The floor is yours.
Good morning. Oh gosh, should have brought a glass of water. I haven't spoken for a while. My briefing this morning is going to be brief, although I'm covering the 6 areas. It's brief. However, never to miss an opportunity, those that know me well, to put a plug in for the bus company, and that is on the bus bridge yesterday. We take pride at the bus company in being flexible and nimble. I talk about it all the time at my manager meetings and when I do my coffee sessions and one-on-ones, because that really is what the bus company is all about, scheduled service, but also to be flexible. I'll talk a little bit about special events, but on our briefing this morning, I'm sorry. Thanks, Fran. Gosh, thank you. On the briefing this morning, we provided 18 buses. We have a protocol. It was a tough bus bridge to do. It was at our peak time. It was Broadway to Stadium, not Main to Stadium, so it's a long haul. We have a protocol in place at our control center, and we take buses from 2-minute or 3-minute service. We divert them there while we're out canvassing operators to work overtime and our spare board and such. So our people did a very, very good job. They told me this morning that the crowds were very high. So, yeah, sorry. Okay, we'll see if my voice holds out here. If you recall from my lengthy fleet presentation last board meeting, we were concerned about the hybrid or the diesel. Boy, I'm sorry, I'm just having trouble with my throat, so please bear with me. I'll talk a little quieter. We had put in an order of a number of diesel buses in September of 2016. We had funding approval from Metro Vancouver. I had raised that we wanted to revisit that under our low carbon strategy moving forward. Very pleased to say that on July 19th, the Metro Board did approve the additional funding. So our 40-foot buses, we had ordered 57 funding for 57 diesels, and we have now got the funding to change that to 47 CNG buses and 12 hybrid buses. Very pleased about that. Our 60-foot buses, we had an order funding for 52 diesels, and we were able to change those to 52 hybrids. So we're very pleased that Metro Vancouver supported us on that and gave us the funding for it. All bus deliveries beginning on 2018, conventional bus delivery will have our safety barriers, our operator safety barriers, either installed or ready to install when they arrive here. So we're very pleased. We'll start seeing those in service in the early part of 2018. I'm also pleased to confirm our second trial pilot that we're going to do this year. We did the BYD battery electric bus in June, and in late October, if not early November, we'll be beginning our 2 double-decker trials. I put the routes up there that we're going to trial them on. This is an exciting bus, a real customer enhancement, we believe. We need to trial it because we think we really like the bus. We think there's a lot in it for us. Our customers are going to like it, but that's what trials are for. It's to work out everything and to understand the buses completely. So they're 2 42-foot Alexander Dennis buses. That's the manufacturer. They are 13 feet 6 inches in height. The BC Transit buses are 14 feet. This is a relatively new model of the last 3 or 4 years, so we're excited to bring that in. 13.6 fits in the tunnel, 14 feet does not. Alexander Dennis brought us a bus in August. We took a look at it to prepare for the trial. I asked Dan, our VP of Maintenance, please tell me that in August you did actually drive it through the tunnel, so we won't have a problem. He confirmed we drove it through several times, so we won't have that problem, so very pleased with that. It's got a seating capacity for 80, which is a 60% increase over the seating capacity of a 60-foot articulated bus. It's got reclining seats on top. And 36 fixed seats on the bottom. It's very bright and comfortable if you've ridden on them over in Victoria. It will come to us for 2 or 3 weeks before we put out in service because we're going to wrap it properly. We're going to install a fare box, Compass mobile validators, the in-it package, which is GPS, next stop announcement, digital signs, TCOM communication. So it will be up and ready just like our regular buses. There's the routes that we potentially want to try them on. It is in our view, it is a highway bus replacement. So we're focusing on the highway bus routes. Handy Dart, as Kevin mentioned, I have Louise Hardy here if we need more information on some of these, but I'll just track through. Several of the Handy Dart customer service recommendations were approved by the board here on March 30th. These recommendations came from the Policy and Service Delivery Review. I'll touch on a few of the highlights and a couple of items that we're looking, or initiatives that we're looking going forward. There will be a web form, which is now live for our taxi customers. As you know, over the past couple of years, taxi complaints came in. It would take a while for those complaints to come to us, or recommendations to improve on it. The web form will allow the customers now to at a very convenient way to report into us. They can do it either through the TransLink website or on a mobile app, and that information will get to us very quickly. So we're very pleased that we've introduced that. The complaints and commendations are coming in-house on October 1st. We will have Monday to Friday service. We will also have evening and weekend service. We're just hiring up for that now, so that's a real customer enhancement and gets us much closer to the customers, to the complaints, and we'll be able to react much quicker. One of the complaints we had with taxis is we would order a taxi. The taxi would say, we'll be there at this particular time. The taxi didn't show. We would call the taxi company. It would take a long time to find out where that taxi was. Taxis today have GPS on board, and one of our taxi partners has offered to allow us to get into the and be part of their GPS tracking system, so that when a taxi is ordered, we will ourselves be able to go in there and see exactly where that taxi is, and if it's delayed because of a motor vehicle accident or highway construction or something, we'll be able to communicate that to the customer, or at least go to an alternate provider. So it's a real enhancement going forward. We're looking at increased visibility for waiting customers. What does that mean? There is a disconnect. We've had many complaints that the customer, we call for a taxi, they're going to meet at a certain spot, and the taxi shows up somewhere else. A taxi cab calls us, the customer's not there, the customer's there, we can't find the taxi. And so what kind of visibility or signage, or what can we do to help for that? We've received interest from the Fraser Health Authority on trialing a customer health signaling device, a flashing light to make identifying handy-dart taxi passengers easier to identify. So we're pleased. We're going to look at that going forward. We give our customers a 10 minutes advance warning when their pickup is to arrive. We have had, we've identified 90 per day, up to 90 per day failures of that call. So that's unacceptable to us. And so we've worked with the contractor to improve that failed caller rate. We believe we've got some enhancements about to put in, and hopefully that will improve the service. Customers are given a 30-minute window during which their ride will arrive. So if they're asking for 10:15 or 10:30, they're given a 30-minute window. We're going to use the Apis Reid survey, determine if there's a particular 15-minute window in that 30-minute window that they would prefer us to come, because there are times when we do have that flexibility. And if a customer prefers to be picked up in the first 15 minutes of the 30 minutes or the second, we'll have an opportunity to ask them and apply that. So we're pleased with that. Louise, did I miss anything? No. Oh, okay, thanks. Bus service, Kevin mentioned it. I decided that this slide, every quarter we announce to you what our service increase hours are, and I thought, let's do a 2017 overall, and the number is significant. As you know, we just rolled out 105,000 hours. We're going to roll out another 12,000 hours in December. It's a total of 206,000 hours, and as you can see, that's a 3% increase in our total annual hours compared to 2016. That's significant. That's an additional 150 operators to hire that we did this year. We were able to hire. It was a real strain on the system, but we were able to hire them, and we're pleased with that. The growing communities, of course, under the 10-year plan are getting more transit options. We're introducing new and extended bus service in 3 areas, developing areas of Surrey, Langley, and Maple Ridge. And in this slide, I just wanted to sort of title it a little bit differently and just sort of capture some of the highlights, so you can see increased capacity on the overcrowded routes, frequency increases for post-secondary, and then first-time neighborhoods receiving service. And I thought that was a nice way to just capture it and just tell the story in a little different way. Every September I do the similar report to the board, and that is the special events. Sort of segues off of the bus bridge. We do a lot of special events and provide extra busing for the community. I'm very proud of what we do in the summertime and how we manage to do it. We're always improving it with signage and that. So here's some stats to share with you. It's just of interest. We had, from June to August, 94 special events, such as a Pride Parade, marathons, and festivals. That resulted in 137 reroutes. In addition to that, all the construction that we're all driving in, 572 bus stops impacted for construction or filming in that short period of time. 3 big events, of course, Canada Day, that was 18 extra buses we provided. Celebration of Lights, that's 32 extra buses for each of the 3 nights. And then the P&E, we're up to 7 buses throughout that period of time. We have actually a person, and their job is special events to come, and it's a very busy job. And finally, sustainability, of course, one of our core values, our environmental group. works very hard in the background. They're always looking for opportunities. Continuous improvement, of course, for us is just our way of life. In 2015, an energy study was done at our Richmond Center, Richmond Transit Center. A study found opportunities for electrical and natural gas energy savings. This is a bit technical, but through mechanical, control and lighting measures and retrofits. And as you can see, some of the savings that we put in place in April, we began replacing both interior and exterior lights with LED technology. They tell me in August we saved our kilowatt hours was 32% reduction, and you can see on the natural gas, so very, very significant. So I apologize for my voice, and that completes my report. Just my excuse not to get questions, I guess.
You're not, that's not happening, Hayden.
That's not happening.
I have Anne, and then Marie, and then Janet.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your report. I have a quick question about the double-decker buses and then two about collisions. On the double-decker buses, are service bays a constraint in terms of maintaining and keeping those buses on the road?
They are. No, they are. No,
Yeah.
No, they are. We will have to do some infrastructure changes if we decide to purchase the fleet.
Yeah.
Yes. The fueling station has to be redone. Some of the garages redone.
Yeah.
But that infrastructure cost, we've looked at it. We can spread it over 3 or 4 years and still offer the service as the buses are coming in. So that will be one of our analysis to decide whether we take the buses in or not.
Thank you. And then collisions, I noticed that preventable collisions per 1,000 kilometers are not quite at goal. And I'm just wondering what
They're not what?
They're a little higher than your
Goal.
it's odd to have a goal for you want to have so many
Right.
preventable collisions, but I guess there's going to be some. So my first question is what you're doing to reduce preventable collisions. And secondly, I noticed that the numbers don't include contracted services, and do we track them as well? Do we have
I'm not
stats?
sure. We do track contracted services, but sometimes we rely on their data to report to us on that. I'll get back to you more on that. Preventables is something we put a lot of energy in. In our initial training, we bring back operators for refresher training. Any bus that has video cameras, we do a study on it. We learn from that. We try to we reach out to that operator. We incorporate that in our training, so we work on part of that. I agree with you. Preventables are unacceptable.
Our goal really should be zero.
I don't want to pick on anybody. I can share with you when we've asked a question, it's been pointed out to me. Remember, Hayden, we have a lot of new operators, and we train them hard, and there is a lot of experience that comes over time with the operators. So that's a part of it. The amount of construction, the detours. There's a number of areas that do it, but I share with you, our goal is zero. Yeah.
Good to actually see that goal move to zero over time.
Thank you. Murray.
Thank you. Hayden, I was wondering, in terms of the pilot on the battery electric buses, I'm not sure if I've missed anything on that, but are we going to be getting a report on that, or what were the...
Sure, we can provide the board with the report. We have our internal reports on that.
Okay, was it favorable or unfavorable or neutral, or what were your... I know that's
Sure, so
emerging
there's almost two parts. One is BYD as a bus itself up against New Flyer and Nova, and that's one issue. We really didn't spend a lot of time on that. We were more focused on the operation of a battery electric bus.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things that we were really interested in, which ended up being a positive one. The range that they set. So they told us it had a 250 kilometer, 300 kilometer range. We found it up on average at 280, 290, which was on the high side. I will sort of preface that by saying it was June, we didn't need air conditioning and we didn't need heaters, and that draws down, but we were pleased with that. They said the overnight charging, these are slow charging, would take anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. They were accurate about that. It was 4 to 6 hours. It didn't take 10 hours. The charge time didn't increase over time. So from that perspective, it was interesting. The technology of a battery electric bus, a little bit different for the operator. It has regeneration, and so as you brake or you take your foot off, it actually starts to recapture some of the energy, and so the braking and the handling of the bus was different. But the operator said nothing that they wouldn't be able to get used to. So that's really where our focus was, and it was good. We're pleased with the Q-Trick trial coming up with the Nova New Flyer buses. We'll be looking at everything in a lot more detail.
Yeah, I would just add to that. We've I think completed inking all the paperwork with the various different funding partners on the Q-Trick trial. So the BYD bus that Hayden was referring to was an overnight slow charge. The project with the 4 buses Hayden's referring to is then the fast charge on route charging on the Route 100. While we're not going to have those buses here until probably late next year, I believe, or maybe early the following year, after the buses arrive and the charging stations are built. By roughly mid-year next year, we should be coming forward with our low carbon fleet strategy. So one of the challenges we all have in the business now is do you throw everything into the overnight charging and then start thinking about what happens to your depots? How do you start creating charging infrastructure? Do you throw your lot into on-route charging and all the complications, or you do both? And some of this is really trying to understand how quickly battery technology is going to continue to progress. So I'm hopeful that by the time we bring back to the board our low carbon fleet strategy, we'll have deeper insights into that I think tricky question, and we can really start charting out a course. How do we move into really electrifying large portions of our fleet? So this testing is really all part of that learning, I think, that the organization is undertaking at this point.
So when you think today it takes us at night 10 minutes to fuel a bus, and now in an overnight charge, 4 to 6 hours. It's a lot of real estate to get that. So those are the things we have to look at.
Thank you, Janet.
Yeah, I have a couple of quick questions,
Sure.
but first I just wanted to say that your verbal presentation gives us a really good picture of the logistical challenges of managing, some of the things you discussed, the special events, the service disruptions requiring the bus bridges, and then of course construction. So I just thought I would like to express appreciation and ask you to express that appreciation to the team for
I'll pass that
what
on.
I think is a job
They'll
very well
appreciate
done.
that very much. Thank you.
Okay, now my 2 questions,
Sure.
and they're minor ones. First of all, with the double-decker buses, is stability of the bus an issue? And my second question was the collisions. Is much of that attributable to collisions between bicycles and buses, given the increase in bicycle traffic?
So on the stability
Yeah.
question, I mean, we'll look at that. They tell us that's not an issue.
Not, okay.
You would think it is, but they tell us it's not. We'll certainly trial it, and
Okay.
we'll let you know.
Yeah, thanks.
No, collisions, I mean, I don't think it's mostly bicycles. I'll have to look at the
Yeah,
stats.
it's just curious because it's,
I mean,
it's a
and for-
very positive thing that we have so many more people riding bicycles.
Yeah.
But, as a bicycle rider myself, and also as I don't drive that much, but when I do, I'm very conscious of, and I just wondered how much of that might be.
So we break it into preventables and non-preventables, and
Yeah.
pedestrians,
Yeah.
bicycles, and vehicles.
Yeah.
So we break it into a number of
Yeah, it'd be
different
interesting to
categories.
follow up.
Sure,
but
I'll
thank you
do
for
that.
Any other questions? Oh, Sarah?
So when you say preventable, I have 2 questions.
Sure,
That's right.
sure.
When they're preventable, it's preventable by the driver itself, not necessarily preventable. The statistics around people that hit buses that could have been prevented, that's not in that stat.
Correct.
Okay.
So it was a basically operator error in our opinion.
Right. And I'm just wondering, one, are collisions going up the other way with people hitting our
I'll look at that again.
vehicles, just going on the distracted driver issue? It's very prevalent right now. And I know that in our own fleet, we're getting hit a lot. My second question was about your note around passenger injury reduction strategy being formed. I think that's a great initiative, and I'm just wondering if there was any more color you could give us at this point, or whether it was a bit early.
It's a bit early. I'd like to report on it later if that's okay. We get a lot of mirrors clipped as we're driving along. The cameras have made a real difference for us, from preventables to non-preventables. That's made a real difference for us. But there's a lot of driving, a lot of construction. There's the the roads in the busy congested areas, the traffic moves quite quickly for our operators. There's a lot of hard braking that happens. It's a difficult environment, and I think, we try very hard to reduce the amount of collisions, but it's a tough environment.
I just have one last thing. First, I just want to thank, I didn't get your bus driver's name, but I ran out of gas a while ago and I was stuck on a very busy street, and your driver actually stopped and helped me push my vehicle off the road.
Well, that's.
So thank
I
you
wish
very
you had his
much.
name. I'm going to applaud him as well. I wish you had his name. Thank you. Thanks for that.
It is a whole new service feature.
Yeah.
Hayden, you're not off the hook yet.
Okay.
Was there somebody over here that had a question? I had a couple of questions
Sure.
that I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you. One was about so it's the value of the compass cards that we've been donating. I was just curious about that. And also about the luggage rack pilot program.
Sure. You mean the recovery of the
The-
donated compass
exactly,
cards?
yeah.
We have 5 locations. We've had 2 pickups of the 5 locations since we started it. About 150 cards, value I think just over $1,100. We donate that to United Way.
That's fantastic. So how often will that happen, Hayden?
I think every quarter we go to the 5
Okay.
different drop-off. There's a drop box at the Compass call center as well. We don't do the pickup on
Okay.
that, so I don't have their
Okay.
stats.
And the luggage rack.
The luggage rack, they're just arriving. There are 4, so we had the 1 pilot, and so there's 4, so we'll have a total of 5. We're going to we're sort of overloaded here on work, so it looks like we'll start installing them in November and have them all installed by the end of the year for the Tsawwassen Ferry. The 5 buses that are dedicated to that route.
What I was most pleased about was this was a recommendation from one of our customers.
It was.
That came forward and suggested that we do this, and it's been well received.
And we ran a trial, we made some changes on the location
Right.
and surveyed, so it's good. It's a great initiative.
Yeah, great. Thank
I'll
you.
let you know when they're installed.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, Hayden, I think you're off the hook. All right, now I'd like to invite Doug Lepard up, who's the Chief Officer for the Transit Police.
I was hoping you'd have some more questions for Hayden, because I like to see him squirm a bit, but. Good morning. I'm hoping that, I know that there has been a PowerPoint slide gremlin get in there the occasional time, so I'm hoping my slides are survived and in the original order. So I'll just be very brief and then answer any questions that you have, including about my report. So first of all, like all of us in the enterprise, customer service is really important to us, and I've talked about this with you before. It's very important to us as well. We are a police force, we do policing, but customer service for all the people that we deal with, passengers and others, because they're not the only ones that we're dealing with in and around our stations, so that is a priority for us. We provide training to our members about it, about public engagement policing. I note that in the last quarter, I think the feelings of safety on the Skytrain were the highest that they've ever been. We know that we play a part in that along with other system staff and other variables. Our neighborhood police officer program is important as well, because they're the ones that are getting people to resources who are troubled and having problems, whether they're setting up a homeless camp underneath our guideway or causing disorder problems in the station. So we take a very holistic approach to it and try and get them to resources and thereby reducing the problems that can be created. Speaking of ideas from the public, I have this, what we call the Chiefs Community Council, and it's a group of representatives from various organizations, Alzheimer's Society, other service organizations, colleges and universities, that sort of thing. And one of my community representatives suggested, I don't think that our text number is out there enough, that this is a way to encourage reporting. Could you get that on the compass cards? So I worked with TransLink staff who were extremely helpful, and now all the new stock compass cards you'll see in the red circle there have our text number on it. So that is It's a best practice. We introduced the text number several years ago. I see in the media just last month, TTC in Toronto has just adopted it. There are other agencies that have been doing it as well. And we get a lot, about 250 texts a month of incidents, which about 70% of them are legitimate policing issues to deal with: disorder, someone causing a problem, someone, you know, a voyeur, someone harassing a woman on the train, and that sort of thing. And the other 30% or so are a wide variety of things. Some of them are actually for the train company to pass on to them various issues. So you all know that Evergreen is online now. This is something that we put a lot of energy into, is working with the Port Moody Police and the Coquitlam RCMP. We magnify them, they magnify us. Force multipliers, you know, Port Moody is a very small police department, 51 members. And so it is difficult for them to deal with major issues that come up, like on Canada Day and other community celebrations. We had an issue with people drinking on the buses on the way to White Pine Beach, and so we help them with that. They come and ride with us as well and magnify our resources. That's Constable Jenny Chung, our neighborhood police officer for that area, and so she is very involved with agencies in the area around our stations and also with the jurisdictional police. And so there's a great partnership that has flowed from the top down, from the officer in charge in Coquitlam, Sean Maloney, and the new chief of the Port Moody Police, Dave Flugel. So great trickle down attitudes and great cooperation from their members. I say we are a police force, and we deal with a lot of traditional policing issues. So that's just a slide showing the sort of breakdown of incidents we've dealt with. This actually goes up to June 22nd of this year. On Evergreen, the right side is sort of the criminal stuff. Left side is the disorder and other things that we're dealing with, and including missing persons and so on. So nothing to be alarmed about here. It's a very safe system, and the Evergreen extension particularly has been, you know, I would say that has been excellent in terms of, you know, feelings of safety and the relatively small number of incidents that are occurring. Nevertheless, that when you've got 30,000 people boarding, there are going to be problems, and you can see the breakdown there, and we're staying on top of it. And that's the best way to deal with these things, is to prevent them from growing into anything that really is a problem. This is Broadway and Commercial. This is one of our 6 hub offices that we're setting up, so our neighborhood police officer have a place to, not only for our members to go and write reports and stay on the line and that sort of thing, but to provide a place for people to report things to. Not very welcoming at all. We worked with TransLink, and that's what it looks like now. So a lot more welcoming and informative as well. Recruiting, there is a lot of competition among municipal police departments in the Lower Mainland. We're all fighting for the same recruits. I'm very pleased that we are still able to attract really good recruits. That I think has to do with our ever increasing reputation among policing in the community. Latest 6 officers that we're sending to the police academy that we just swore in a week or so ago. 6 second languages between them, well educated, lots of volunteer and relevant work service. So we're proud of the people that we're able to attract. Special events, so that has been mentioned a couple of times. If any of you remember, we had a riot in 2011. There was a report done, an independent report done by John Furlong and Mr. O'Keefe from Nova Scotia, and one of the learnings from that was, look, that there needs to be way more upstream interdiction of liquor and bad problems and that sort of thing. Don't wait until you've got a toxic soup that's in the downtown core of Vancouver, because then it's too late. So we are a leader in the regional liquor interdiction strategy and making sure that there are that the problems that might be occurring, we're dealing with them upstream and not downstream. And as well, there are huge crowds to manage, and as you know, just like Broadway and Commercial, if you saw Global News last night, you saw a couple of our transit police officers there, making sure that tempers don't flare out of control and people butting in line and that sort of thing that can, you know, one thing leads to another and you've got fists flying. And managing big crowds like this is a challenge as well, particularly the waterfront station and Burrard station. So our officers are out there relieving the jurisdictional police of having to deal with that because they've got lots of issues to deal with, and we actually play a significant role in coordinating that upstream liquor interdiction strategy. You can see on the right there, that's Inspector Doug Semple, who is our gold commander for the night, just checking out things, make sure everything is going well. And great cooperation from our jurisdictional partners. So I will just stop there and happy to answer any questions about my presentation or my report or anything else that you've got.
Thank you, Doug. Anne first, and then Tony, you had a question? Okay.
You mentioned the liquor interdiction strategy, and so what are your plans for the cannabis management as cannabis is legalized? And I think all of us are seeing it, smelling it more. So what's the plan?
Well, we really need to wait to see what the province does about regulating it, because one of the key questions that's out there is it going to be treated like liquor and it's going to be an offense to consume it in public, or is it going to be treated like cigarettes, in which it's not, and then, you know, it's going to have to be dealt with by bylaws and so on. So we are an active participant in discussions around that. Actually, one of my members is sitting on the BC Association of Chiefs of Police committee that is working with the provincial government on making sure that we provide input on public safety issues, and not only around public safety, but how we deal with it, how all of us deal with it in the workplace. Because it's a little bit different than, you know, other kinds of medication in that, you know, it can be in your system for weeks. So I don't have an answer for you yet, because we can't make plans until we know what the law looks like and then what the provincial regulations are going to look like. But as always, I mean, a big part of our job is to manage disorder, and I don't want to give a shout out for the marijuana industry, but other than I'd rather deal with someone that's stoned than's drunk. We will manage it and we will adapt, and we will expect to be given the tools by government, just like there are tools in the Liquor Act to deal with liquor issues, which we use very effectively. We expect to be given the tools to deal with the consumption of marijuana.
It'd be great. I think we want to be kept apprised as we approach and get through that regulatory gateway, what our approach is going to be.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Tony?
Yes, I'm not sure if this is a question or just a comment. I actually just got back from Europe, and so did a lot of traveling on transit. In Munich, of course, there's open drinking, so I was quite surprised to see people with open bottles of beer drinking as we're sort of transiting through the city. In terms of the actual, we did go to Oktoberfest. The transit station at Oktoberfest, they actually had to have security people who would look out for people who were a bit sort of drunk, I guess, and make sure that if they came close to the yellow line, that they would physically sort of stop them and prevent them from sort of going into the train track. So I'm not sure if that was just an issue for Oktoberfest or just for that particular station, but it was just interesting to see their approach with respect to open drinking on their transit system and some of the issues that they sort of had to deal with.
Yeah, well, I would just say that I think I'm not telling any secrets that there's a different culture that's, you know, developed over many years in terms of public drinking in Europe. They seem to be much more able and mature in the way that they deal with it. We haven't seen that here, that level of maturity, and I'm certainly not looking forward to, you know, further liberalization of the liquor laws in terms of the police's ability to prevent and deter and manage that kind of behavior. I would say, though, that, you know, you do have to look at the other differences. Germany happens to be a very rules-oriented society, and you can go to jail for, you know, telling a police officer to FO. So, you know, they all, there's the carrots of the, you know, the behavior that they're allowed to engage in, but there's some pretty big sticks too, that are not going to fly here in Canada. And, you know, we're not asking for them.
Thank you. Marcella.
Thanks, Doug. Some time ago, and actually not that long ago, we talked a lot about assault, particularly on women, on buses and trains, and you just haven't reported specifically on it. Have things changed so it's not as much of a high issue as it was a year ago, or is it, like, what's your perspective on that?
No, I mean, I'm always considering what's important to tell you, and there's so many different things that I could talk to you about, but you know, sex offending on transit systems is a big problem around the world, and we are no different. We're certainly not as bad as in some jurisdictions, like in Asia, where they've had to resort to women-only trains because the problem is such a big problem. And so it is one of our operational priorities to focus on that. I actually am hoping to revisit a previous awareness program. I would like to report that, which is true, that reports of sex offending have decreased in the last year. That actually makes me a bit nervous because we know that such a small percentage of them are reported. We actually want to see the number, and if we look at systems around the world, the systems that are doing well in terms of encouraging reporting, removing barriers to reporting, building confidence that they will be dealt with thoroughly, the numbers, you know, go up to a certain point and then plateau. So, like I say, given the number, you know, the small number that we know are reported. Having said that, you know, if we look at, even if we extrapolate from that number and say that only 5 or 10% are being reported, any number is too high. But in terms of the ratio to women who are traveling on the trains, it is still a very, very small percentage. I have, you know, daughters who are in university who ride the transit system frequently. They have never had a problem. But some people do, and these offenders tend to target people with certain characteristics that make them more vulnerable. And so we not only support excellence in investigations to ensure that we're catching the offenders and holding them accountable, seeking conditions from the courts to keep them off the transit system or otherwise to manage their behavior, but also to encourage women and girls and others to report these incidents and making it easy for them, whether it's the text number or putting information out there. The campaign the poster campaign that we did with TransLink last year, and community groups as well, and we know that we probably need to refresh that campaign because it's not a problem that's going to go away. It's a problem that we can influence in terms of managing it well.
Thank you. So I think, unless there's any other questions, I think that concludes your time. I just wanted to say on behalf of the board for the presentations between Vivian, Hayden, and Doug, how much we appreciate the reports. I noticed the new continuity between the reports this time. They're all starting to look and feel similar data, and how much how helpful that is for all the board members, and then the really excellent presentations. So that's to all three. And I know you've received that feedback from different members, but I just wanted to say how much we appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so I am going to start a presentation, but Jeff is going to come up and join me, Jeff Cross. And this is the item number 4.1 on our agenda, which is the Joint Transportation Planning and Funding Committee report. This committee has remained active throughout the summer. We have met 3 times, and this committee is co-chaired between myself and Mayor Cote, and we have 6 mayors on this committee and 5 board members. We work on several areas, and right now our focus is helping to ensure the new provincial government is well briefed on the regional transportation issues, and then the action steps for implementing the mayor's vision are clearly understood. And you can understand with the timing of the election and everything being settled why we were so active throughout the summer. We are providing input and feedback as we prepare for the final draft business cases for the Patello Bridge and the rapid transit projects for review and decision by the provincial government. And we're working through the scope of what's next for what comes next for the next major expansion investment plan. and for implementing the mayor's vision. I'm pleased to report that every indication is that this provincial government are working in tandem with us to try and meet the milestones that Jeff is going to cover in his update. There's lots of action that's going to happen, we hope, over the next couple of weeks that will culminate in some broader public and stakeholder engagement. So Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Chair. So a few things I'm going to go through is just kind of a progress report on where we're at with those discussions and where the Planning and Funding Committee has evolved in understanding of both what the scope of the next investment plan would be, as well as what the sort of key financial components of that would be from each level of government. So this is our accountability dashboard in regards to implementing the mayor's vision. I think you've seen it a number of times. What we've really, it's difficult, I know, for the public maybe to see it at this scale, but what we've really been working on is the third column. So this outlines in the first column everything that is in the mayor's 10-year vision, which the clock started ticking officially in November of 2016 when you approved the Phase 1 investment plan. So 2017 is the first year of that plan. So that plan, Phase 1, basically turned on the first 3 years of the mayor's vision, and that's outlined in column number 2. Very significant increases in service and also sort of a down payment, if you will, on the rapid transit projects, getting those ready for the next phase. What we're really talking about now in those discussions in earnest with the mayors, the board, and with the provincial government is what that next investment plan would look like. And ostensibly, it's really years sort of 4 to 5 of the mayor's vision that we would be taking on as far as expansion across all modes of service, whether it be bus, C-bus, handy dart, rail, and our spending on roads, cycling, and walking, but also very importantly advancing actual approval of construction for Millennium Line Broadway extension, stage 1 of South of Fraser Rapid Transit, as well as the very significant upgrades and expansion for Expo Millennium Line for the existing rail components. So that's what the working component that you see in that column number 3. I can report that we've been working through with the Planning and Funding Committee. I've been doing staff engagements, municipal staff in Metro Vancouver, on what that would look like, using a similar template to what we did in Phase 1, where we're actually outlining what the bus services, what the increases to rail would be, so that there's a real contract with the municipalities and the public when we get ready for that. We'll be working with you, with the mayors in October, engaging MLAs in Victoria as well as what that looks like. That would then prepare us for kind of understanding the scope and what the exact funding requirement is so that we can come out and talk to the public. So we're really thinking about advancing that next phase in 2 investment plans. This is sort of the logistics through our legislation of making this happen. Kevin mentioned earlier our first priority, and I'll go in a little bit more detail, is the timing around Patello to try and deal with that this fall. That's the first set of rows. The second set of rows is really then the rest of that next phase would come on the heels of that, and the bottom line is that we're working towards trying to have that resolved in the first quarter of 2018 to stay on our schedules. There'll be public engagement involved with both of those once these things start to get a bit firmed up so that we know exactly what the parameters are that we are working within. So in order to kind of understand what the funding situation would be, there's really sort of all three levels of government need to be firmed up. We have the $2.2 billion commitment to the 10-year vision from the federal government. How we allocate that, we're kind of finalizing as we understand what the total costs of each one of the major projects will be, and then what's applicable for the federal government's money to go towards that. The next piece is working with the provincial government on what their 40% commitment to the full vision would translate to, as far as what the scope of each one of those projects that would advance, as well as some of the ancillary improvements to whether it be transit exchanges, depots, etc., that we're also in discussions with them. So that will be the key piece around the transit. The next and final one is on the Patello Bridge. So what does that 40% equate to, as well as how they would replace what otherwise would have been toll revenue that would be generating the regional share. So that will then give us the provincial piece, and then that leaves what the regional piece is left to advance that. So kind of our current understanding per the sort of draft estimates where we're getting towards is that the region, after looking at what the eligible costs would be for both the federal and provincial levels, would be responsible for about 25 to 30% of the capital associated with the 2 expansion projects and the upgrades to Expo and Millennium Line. About 60% of the capital costs of the other components are related to transit, cycling, and walking within the and roads within the program, as well as obviously the ongoing operating costs. When you combine those whole things, that will generate what the regional funding gap is. The mayors had put forward some proposals last year. We're working with the new provincial government exactly on what those new regional revenue sources may be. Obviously, carbon tax was raised in the budget as one of the potential tools, so we'll be looking at them with them how that might be one of the components to the regional solution. So more detailed on timelines, the trigger for advancing Patello is an agreement with the province exactly on what their 40% share will look like, as well as what the revenue allocation will be for ongoing subsidy or commitments to our contract for the rest of the borrowing for that. We're hoping that is resolved in the coming weeks, actually, so in October, so that we can then go out and have a public consultation, be about 2 to 3 weeks on the bridge, come back to you with an investment plan probably in November right now, working on the timelines, and then look to quickly release an RFQ so that Sandy and his team can start to get to the RFP process and stay online for construction. The scope is consistent with what we have been consulting on over the last year with both municipalities, and has been endorsed by the Council in the City of New Westminster and the City of Surrey in regards to both the 4-lane, which could be expandable to 6 lanes in the future, as well as those connections on both sides of the river, including improved direct connections to South Fraser Perimeter Road on the south side of the river. A key component as we look at when we put the business case in is that while we're not anticipating point tolls right now based on the direction of this provincial government, the policy direction from you and from the Mayor's Council is still to have a comprehensive mobility pricing in place by 2023 that would help manage the demand. So we're looking at what the bookends would be, whether it would, when we're looking at volumes, if it was untold versus some level of pricing in the region to kind of understand what the performance would be. As we've gone through with you in the past, we're looking at a design build finance approach for this, and we'll be, as soon as we finalize that business case in conversations with the provincial government, we'll be able to update the public on that, and that will be part of the consultation that we're looking at in coming weeks and months. I've gone through what the funding ask requirement is at the provincial level. Key pieces with the new Transport Canada fund around trade and transport corridor initiatives, looking at bottlenecks across the country, especially in port cities. We have put in a request for funding both for a portion of the bridge, which is reflective of the key goods movement element that the bridge plays. About 10% of the volumes crossing the bridge are truck movements, as well as some of those direct connections to South Fraser Perimeter Road, which have disproportionate benefits for the goods movement. So that would help reduce what the otherwise provincial subsidy would be if we're able to obtain those grants. The first round of expression of interest closed in September. We're hoping to hear back if we've been screened in by actually next week. We would get the first indication, then they would be looking for more detailed business casing on that.
I believe the detailed business case, though, is required quite rapidly as well, right?
Correct. This would move. They're looking at making awards this fall. They really want to start getting money and projects out the door. So we anticipate, and thankfully we have the draft business case done, that we would be able to put that forward. The other piece that was prescribed by the vision that needs to be part of this that we've been working on with municipalities, there were two things. One about was what do the triggers look like if we need to go to 6 lanes in the future, if there is a desire to explore that. So the vision laid out that it should come back to the mayor's vision if in the future significant changes happen both in demand or in the network or in policy. So what do those look like? We've started work with our municipal partners on actually a regional road network strategy that would identify what performance indicators are for congestion, for reliability, for level of service. Those would apply as well to the Patello Bridge, so those would be key pieces then. If you're exceeding those, etc., would be cause for pause, and we would make recommendations for the board and the mayors to take a look at how the bridge is performing in the future. The other piece was the commitment to look at comprehensive pricing, not another single point toll. Clearly, we're in that environment now. So just a quick update then on the timing for the rest of that major plan that I was discussing earlier. We're hoping to get commitments from the provincial government this fall on the business cases and their funding for those major projects, all 3 of the rapid transit projects, as well as the other commitments to the vision. That would allow us to then bring forward and finalize what that regional funding agreement would look like and start to develop the investment plan. As we're showing here, we could go forward then with consultation with the public, exactly what that looks like, what the proposals are for service increases, routes, etc., and get some feedback from them, and have before you, we're showing here right now, in March, an investment plan that you could approve along with the Mayor's Council, and that would allow us to go to procurement, both on the RFQ and the RFP process, as you see here, in April and August respectively, and that would stay on schedule per the development of those major projects. As you're aware, if we delay, that causes very significant cost escalations as well, and so we don't want the work to go stale, both what the labor costs are, what the component costs are, the exchange rates, and then obviously real estate and property requirements are a key one that are increasing every day. Finally, there's a little bit of homework on the phase 1 plan that the Planning and Funding Committee has been helping us with, and that's to get the new regional development cost charge designed and in place in order to generate about $15 to $20 million. That was for a lot of the $1.2 billion in capital that was part of phase 1. If that does not happen, otherwise we would have to defer some of the services that were outlined in 2019, and that's obviously not desirable. We need to get that agreed to very quickly. We've been working very closely with municipalities, with Metro Vancouver, with UBC as well, on what the design elements of this would be and what the considerations. We know enough at this point to make a request to the provincial government, which has been made now, to advance that for legislation in the spring. The key piece right now is that transit is not an eligible category for development cost charges in this province. It is in some other provinces, while road improvements are. We're asking that it kind of emulate what is done for the Metro Vancouver Sewerage and Drainage District in regards to who collects it, what exemptions are made for affordable housing and other uses, etc. That will make the administration cleaner. We will be bringing forward to the Planning and Funding Committee and then the Board and the Mayor's Council recommendations on how it exactly applies geographically and what the rates would be to ensure that it meets the objectives about affordability and not slowing down development around our transit system, but also being able to fund sufficient elements that are outlined there. Finally, Kevin mentioned earlier, and I think Hayden did, that we're working with Metro Vancouver to actually get the approval for the funding for the expansion and replacement vehicles necessary to implement phase 1. We're working on this low carbon fleet strategy concurrently. Clearly, we made some shifts last summer, recognizing that we feel that outside of highway operating environments, hybrid or CNG vehicles are now preferable and more cost-effective than operating diesel. So that is sort of our first stage solution at this point as far as pursuing a low carbon fleet strategy. That will be the model that we're looking for when we go to Metro Vancouver in the second week of October for approval of these funds. We hope to have a strategy done by mid next year. We would work with you. We'd take that forward to Metro Vancouver, probably to their Climate Action Committee as well, so that they understand and we're both in lockstep on where we're going as far as electrification of the fleet as well. So this will be a key piece to make sure that we stay on track for delivering the vision. I think that's it.
Thank you, Jeff. Now, I know many of us are on this committee, so we may not have as many questions for Jeff, but for those, Larry.
I just want to go to the Patello Bridge report. If I read everything correctly, if we don't have a funding commitment tomorrow, I think we're late. And haven't heard that there's a funding commitment tomorrow. Is there a funding commitment tomorrow?
We remain in very good active discussions with the province. They're aware of our schedule that Jeff laid out. We're hopeful in the next several weeks we will have the funding commitment. As those conversations over the next few weeks progress, we can probably make certain adjustments within the context of the schedule that Jeff put out that could keep us on or close to schedule. So those would be conversations that would be contingent on seeing progress on the discussions with the province, which so far are going well.
So at what point will what you just said not really work anymore? At what point will we actually start being late from the deadline, which is that we have to close this bridge?
What our hope is to get the RFQ out on the streets in November. So we may have a certain amount of flexibility as it relates to keeping on schedule and issuing the RFQ while concurrently moving through with the public process that Jeff outlined and taking it to to an investment plan to both the board and the Mayor's Council. So there is some flexibility. It is contingent on getting good solid signals from the province.
So you're feeling optimistic, though you're going to proceed with most of the other steps in the assumption that in the next few weeks this funding is coming through according to what you've heard at more informal level from...
We're encouraged by the conversations that we're having with the province that would enable us to keep to the key schedule is going to procurement.
Okay, great. The second thing is the National Trade Corridor grants. The project isn't contingent on those grants. That's only going to offset the provincial share. Is that my understanding? Is that what you told us?
That is correct. So we belong to the Gateway Transportation Collaboration Forum, which includes the provincial government, both Gateway and MOTI. We collectively agree that this is a prime candidate for this, all the members, along with the Port, Gateway Council, etc. So then that would just, and it's appropriate that they would contribute a portion of that. That would just make the rest of the operating subsidy that otherwise would have been required or had to be funded through tolls, if we had tolls in place, lower.
So really, as a board member, I don't need to worry whether or not that it comes through, because it's just going to offset some money that we've already got a kind of in principle commitment to.
So I would say the commitment right now is really with the provincial government and with the removal of tolls, so that they have basically committed to keep us whole. So it's really in regards to that on what the combination of funds that are that kind of bring them forward to that commitment.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Great. Are there any other questions for Jeff? Okay, Jeff, thank you very much. That concludes that section of our agenda. So we'll now move to the next area of our agenda, which is Finance and Audit Committee, and I'm going to ask Tony to deliver his report as the chair.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. So the committee has met twice since our last board meeting, and as you can appreciate, we've talked about we've reviewed and discussed a large number of reports. Don't have the time to sort of go through all of that, but there's a few of the reports that I'd just like to provide a quick summary on some of the issues we discussed as a committee. So under consent agenda, we did receive a report that looked at the recommendations from the 2014 Skytrain independent review. And to date, 11 of those recommendations have been implemented, good progress being made on the other 9, and the program is going to be completed by the end of 2019. So this was the last report that the committee is going to receive on the project specifically. It'll now be reported essentially under the capital program if there's anything any issues that management feels they need to bring to the attention of the board. So it's been a pretty robust process over the last 3 or 4 years with respect to this review that's coming to an end. The second thing, talking about the Patello, of course, our priority is to ensure that the bridge operates safely. So there's a pretty active monitoring program, and we received a report on that, and there's no issues were identified with respect to the safety of the bridge and the ongoing use. We also received a report on our liquidity and mooring requirements. No issues there. TransLink is in a very strong position with respect to cash. When you look at both restricted and unrestricted, that amount is over $1 billion, so there's no issues with respect to liquidity concerns. We also received a report on an annual review of financial risk and our debt management policies. So with respect to our debt management policies, management's proposing just some minor housekeeping changes, which the committee signed off on. The other major issue was the introduction of a new restricted account, and that's our Restricted Land Reserve Fund. So as you know, we're receiving some pretty significant proceeds from the sale of the Oak Ridge Transit Center. So the proceeds from that sale will be put into a restricted fund and will be used with respect to land purchases primarily arising from the 2 major transit projects. We also received an overview of our investment portfolio performance as well as our commercial paper program. Both of those programs are performing well. We have benchmarks that we have established to look at returns, and the returns are within the benchmarks, so the committee was fairly comfortable with that. The committee also undertakes an annual review of accounting policies as well as financial reporting practices. In terms of financial reporting practices, pretty consistent from last year, so no major changes there. And in terms of accounting standards, there's really no new accounting standards that are being introduced that impact TransLink. So again, for our year-end audit is going to be pretty consistent from last year with respect to accounting standards. We also received a report from Zani on the status of the major capital projects. As you know, we're coming to sort of finalization on the business plan, so there's a lot of work that's ongoing to get those business plans in place. And essentially we're on target with respect to those ongoing work in terms of our major capital projects. We got an update from our CIO, Kurt Pregler, on terms of our information technology. Again, good progress is being made on the 2017 initiatives, and so nothing to report in terms of anything sort of going off plan. Kevin mentioned, of course, the Compass programs with the 1 billion taps, so it looks like our Compass project implementation is coming to an end, so the positive news in terms of obviously the use with the 1 billion taps, and it looks as if the program continues to perform well and the project will come in under budget. Committee spent a lot of time with respect to safety management, and so we received a fairly comprehensive presentation, and we had some pretty good robust discussion with senior management. Derek, our Director of Emergency Management, did the primary presentation, but Vivian was there, Hayden was there, Zani was there, and there was some good dialogue between the committee and management focused on safety and how safety is managed at TransLink. We looked at the risks, we looked at the trends, we looked at sort of future directions in terms of how we're going to deal with our safety management program. We talked about safety for our customers, we talked about safety programs in terms of our employees, and we also talked about safety in terms of our significant capital projects and how we manage safety surrounding that. We concluded our discussion with looking at sort of safety key performance indicators. We reviewed those indicators. I think the committee felt fairly comfortable that that was sort of capturing what we needed to know in terms of how we were performing safety, and we talked a little bit about how to move safety forward. And I'm glad to see that our chair opened up with, I think, one of the things that we talked about, which was to have a little bit of a safety focus for each meeting, so that the people attending the meeting would be well informed in terms of in terms of some safety issues. We also met with our external auditors, KPMG. They provided the committee with a pretty comprehensive audit plan for 2017. This sort of covered their approach, which was consistent from previous years, their areas of focus, and of course, just given some of the things that are being managed at TransLink, there was a number of areas that they needed to focus on, obviously Compass being one of them, and in terms of the revenue. We also reviewed materiality thresholds, which are consistent with the previous year, with just a slight increase in terms of materiality. And then lastly, we talked about their fees, which are consistent with their proposal to us and consistent with previous years. We then moved to internal audit. We received an update on the status of the 2017 internal audit program. Again, there's 38 projects. Good progress is being made on those. The committee received 3 reports. The first covered the bus company inventory and stores management. We also looked at West Coast Express operations, and then we looked at corporate records management practices. These reviews, if you haven't seen them, are very thorough, very comprehensive, and there's some really good recommendations that come out of these reviews for management to consider and to implement. And so the committee was pretty pleased with the reports. There's also a requirement for the committee to look at director and employee code of conduct. So there's a few items that arose in terms of that were identified and that were reported. And each of those items, I think there was 3 in total, were investigated and were adequately resolved and dealt with. So I can report that there's really no major issues or ongoing concerns raised to the committee with respect to code of conduct. Lastly, or not lastly, just a couple of other items. One is the committee also reviewed the key financial assumptions for the 2018 budget. These all cover both the cost and the revenue side, and I think we were fairly comfortable with the assumptions presented, and then you'll see that obviously incorporated in the upcoming budget. The other item the committee looked at was the environmental management system. We get semi-annual updates. The board put in a framework that looked at obviously environmental management systems a few years ago. So during this period, police report that the bus company had fewer reportable incidences in terms of releases, and the rapid transit company had sort of a slight increase. So nothing too significant, but the rapid transit company is going to be undertaking a number of initiatives in terms of measures to maybe address this. I think it's important in terms of when we're monitoring this to see that these incidences are kept at a fairly low level. And if there's an increase, then obviously we try and investigate to see if there's anything that we can do to sort of manage that. We also received a report from our enterprise risk management program. As you know, we identified for this year 8 top risks, and we received a status update on those risks, as well as an update on the treatment plans moving forward. So that's just a quick summary update, Madam Chair, in terms of the committee report.
Great, thank you, Tony. Are there any questions for Tony? Again, I know a few of us are on this committee, so anybody that wasn't there had any questions?
Very thorough, thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is number 6, and that is Planning and Stakeholder Relations Committee. And Marcella, as the acting committee chair, will be delivering that report.
Thank you, Chair. It was a good meeting in the absence of Larry. We missed him terribly. First thing to say, and as always, a busy committee meeting. The first thing that we did was we looked at a proposed extension of the Langley Community Shuttle Service contract, and we have recommended that to the board for approval. So I'd like to just pause now and move that that recommendation be accepted by the board.
Okay, and is there a seconder? Thank you, Janet. And all in favor of the extension of that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that's done.
We then looked at statistics regarding public views of the board meetings and AGM. The views, you know, we're recording these meetings. It's a new process for us. So we had a look at who was looking at it, how much, not who, but rather how often, how long they were on. There was nothing significant to report other than the fact that it's good that we're transparent about what we're doing in board meetings. We also looked at a summary of all correspondence that's addressed to this board from the public. And we ensured ourselves that all correspondence was adequately dealt with, responded to, and taken care of. In addition, we had a further discussion about the fact that that correspondence was actually just a small portion of the total correspondence that's brought to TransLink. And again, we discussed the ways in which that correspondence was dealt with and handled, and we were comfortable with what was going on. We then had a very comprehensive review of the rail noise study, which has already been alluded to by Vivian and I think by Kevin. And both Vivian and I think Sandy will be speaking to that shortly. So I won't say anything further about that. We had a significant update on the investment plan and all the issues that has already been gone over by Jeff Cross. So I'm not going to say anything about that. And I think it was alluded to in your report as well, Chair. We looked at the transit service review results, which were presented, and they were discussed again in quite detail. We're going to have a discussion on ridership as well later. I think that's on the agenda. So I won't make any comments about that because we're going to speak to that. One of the things that we did note, in addition to looking at all the numbers and statistics, it's very important that we look at these to continue to improve our system. They're not just random numbers to say, isn't that great? They're actually numbers that are being used to figure out where and how the system's being improved. Then we had a discussion about the future of mobility, which is always really exciting. We were presented with potential ways of progressing work to better understand the future implications of the region, transportation in the region. We looked at things like microtransit. We looked at different forms of bike share and our role in that. We obviously have got the van pooling going out. We talked about the innovation lab, so it's all very exciting to look at what's coming into the future and keeping our eye on that. We then reviewed an update of the many partners, pages of partners that TransLink plans with, departments, municipalities, province, individual, major changes in the region, some legislated, not legislated, as case may be. This is an ongoing piece of work. TransLink is constantly in communication with all these many partners, and this was really just an update for the committee to say, here's who they all are and how we engage with them. We had an update on proximity gates to see what the progress is on that, and we're satisfied it's going well. We then looked at the highlights of the Customer Communication and Public Affairs Quarterly Report, and can only note that it's been an enormous amount of activity. We've heard of some of them around special events, but there's a lot more, and they were highlighted by Steve for us, which was very helpful. And finally, Steve, our VP of Customer Communications and Public Affairs, presented the proposed 2017-2018 communication plan, and we went over that at some detail, and Larry was very disappointed he wasn't there to have a discussion around it, but we represented you very well. The committee is supportive of the direction that the organization is going in, and we're looking forward to hearing even more details of the plan at the next meeting of this committee. And that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcella. Any questions for Marcella in regards to this report? We have two more items on the agenda, as Marcella alluded to, in relation to this committee. So perhaps what I can do is just invite Vivian and Sani up. And as they're coming up, I'd like to say that, as you know, we've heard from public delegations regarding the noise of Skytrain, and it's of great concern to us. We see this trend towards density building around these Skytrain stations, and management is undertaking a noise study, and they're here to provide us with an update as to how the study is going to unfold. So I'll turn it over to Sani and Vivian, who will talk to us about the study. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As we all know, we're expecting another 1 million residents in the region in the coming couple of decades. And what we tend to always focus on is the majority will want to live near our transit assets. And so we've been seeing the delegations come to the board, and it's not a problem that's going to go away. It's as we densify as a region, as more condominiums, more towers, more housing, mid-rise, high-rise housing goes in around our stations, we will be exposing the public to more noise, and they'll have to learn to live with us, and we'll have to accommodate them as best as we can. So you've been hearing a lot about this in terms of the here and now and what we do in terms of maintenance and Vivian's team and in doing what we can to keep the noise levels low or as low as can be and responding to public complaints. But we've decided to take a step, a holistic step, and look at this issue in a broader context. Where are we now? Where are we going? What are the issues, and what can we be doing about them in a more longer-term view? So we've initiated a study, and the number of complaints speak for themselves. They are increasing as the region densifies. You've seen the delegations, and we are committed to doing what we can and to always be doing better. Having said that, this is not a problem that will ever magically go away. We are an urban area, it's busy, it's going to get busier and a little bit noisier. Just as a brief overview, you've seen versions of this before. We are very proactive in the here and now. When we do get a complaint, whether to my team or Vivian's team, we do go out, we do investigate on the ground, we meet with the complainants, often near the site where the noise complaint is coming from, and we do what we can, both to manage expectations, and if there are things we can respond to right away in terms of volumes at the stations or frequency of announcements, we try to do that right away, or maintenance. Vivian's team would go out and do what they can in the here and now. But this is about more of looking at what else can we do. There are operational things, maintenance things, structural, architectural, and policy aspects to this that we can look at. There is a range of solutions which go from baffling the speakers to building barriers which can make a difference. Some are low cost, some are high cost. So in addition to the here and now, we really need to get to grips with what are our options, how much could they cost, and what could we be rolling out in the future. What we've done to date is we've looked at 3 years worth of data, 1,000 complaints, which have come to us from various channels. These covered 2014, 15, and 16, analyzed the density of where the complaints are coming from to begin to understand the magnitude of the problem. And here's an example of the output we're beginning to see in terms of the clustering of the sources of the complaints. Red means more complaints closer in on our stations. Green is still a good volume of complaints, and you can see that where we have density around stations, be it in Vancouver, Burnaby, or New Westminster, we are beginning to get more and more complaints. The thing for me and Vivian to keep in mind is as we are aware of more and newer developments coming on board at places like Gilmore, places potentially at Braid, we can expect to see more of these clusters beginning to develop, and so we can expect these blobs to just keep on growing bigger. The next piece we want to do is we had the data till the end of 2016. We know we opened Evergreen, as Vivian was alluding to earlier. So we will be updating the graphic you just saw with the latest data we've been getting from the Evergreen extension. So we'll be making sure we're as up to date as we can be. And we've initiated actual evidence gathering. It's very easy to complain about noise. It's a bit more work to get actual data of professionally measured noise levels from where the complaints are coming from. So we're hiring the experts to come and help us actually get ambient levels of noise, and then what are we contributing to, be it through operations, through announcements, through maintenance activities, to really get to grips with what is causing the noise, and when we're saying it's bad, how bad is it, and what can we do about it. The phase 1B, as we call it, would be to look at what can be done in terms of what are others doing in best practice, be it related to consistency with local bylaws, consistency with making sure the standards are being met, and can we up our standards to better manage noise levels. We'll be doing noise modeling to say that should we implement any of these solutions, how much benefit can we expect in terms of reductions in decibels. We want to make sure we get the proper value for any money that we invest. And so we'd be looking at the broad range of mitigations available to us. As I mentioned, these will range from some really low-cost quick wins, which we're already looking at, to some what could potentially be quite expensive options. People talk about barriers. Barriers have structural implications, wind loading implications. People talk about putting skirting on the trains, maintenance implications. It's a lot of potential dominoes that we need to think through before we rush off into any one solution. While a lot of work is technical, this is really important as a community engagement exercise. We're not doing this work in the back room and doing our own kind of technical analysis in isolation. We are reaching out to the communities. We're working with them to the point of having the technical teams put noise monitoring devices on the balconies of people who are complaining and who are willing to engage with us, so that we actually get a first-hand experience as to what they're hearing when they're on their balconies and or the windows are open in the summer. So we're getting some really good information and data, and absolutely the people complaining want to work with us. They're really happy to see us engaged, taking this seriously and doing the right thing and adopting an evidence-based approach. We'll also be using the public to talk about potential solutions, timing for solutions, schedule, and this is really important to manage expectations. We don't want to be out there saying we have some magic wand where all the noise will go away. So we're using this engagement with the public to talk about what can we do and what can't we do, and how quickly we can do it, and how expensive it will be when we do it. Schedule, as an overview, we're into it now. The work is starting and will continue through the first part of next year. By the time we get to summer and the second half of 2018, we should have a range of solutions that we can look at. Some quick, easy wins we intend to move on second half of next year. If there are more complex and more expensive solutions, they will need business cases and potentially approvals and some more involved design work. So we'll be tackling those starting in 2019 and onwards, after having consulted with you, of course, and developed the appropriate business cases. So, if you want to add anything different from your end?
I think there's one more couple of slides there. We've got it organised.
Oh, okay, good stuff. Good. Just turn on.
Oh, sorry. Actually, I'd like to pick up from the expectation management, because that is a really big one. And when I speak to our neighbours, they often say, well, you know, I've been here for years, noises got louder. They used to come out and grind when I rang up. And that was true. We did, but we didn't have as many services. The frequency that we provide today, you know, doesn't allow us to get into the system as easily as it may have been in the past. But also we need to get into a very standard maintenance program so that we keep it at a level rather than spot problem solving or you know, hotspots. So, you know, one of the things is I find with our neighbours is helping them understand what we're doing. You know, the study is a very important part of that, but also while we're doing that study, we need to hear our customers, hear our neighbours. And one of the things that I'm working with my team and my customer my customer experience director, is that letting people know when we're going to grind, what the process is, whether there could be a slightly louder noise and why. And then we monitor that and we report back to them. So, you know, like when you're doing work on the network anyway, you do letterbox drops and emails and that type of thing. So we, you know, in between all of this, we want to make it very real. So it's not just please wait for a while, we'll do something, but we'll help manage this as we go forward. I just wanted to talk about the Evergreen Noise. I mentioned very briefly that we did have that spike in noise and then, you know, subsequent complaints, which is there's a true correlation between those two things. That was magic. And I just wanted to show you that one of the things that we've been doing, I know, it's just amazing. I know, it's really great. I don't know what happened. I'm here to entertain. You didn't notice that I was limping. It's probably because Kevin kicked me last night. Not true. I'm only joking. But we have been monitoring this, and you know, I wanted to share with you that, you know, it was a really obvious peak in our neighbours telling us that there is an issue, and we listened to them. One of the things I did get an update just as I was sitting out there. You can see at September the 11th we had 6 noise complaints because of track. 5 of those complaints, or 5 of the 6, were from Evergreen. morning. I've just hot off the press at the end of this month, or close to it, the 28th, we've had 26 complaints all up, and 11 have been from Evergreen. I've actually asked to see where those locations are to see if they're clustered or not. Any complaint about noise is not good. We want to recognise that, but to be able to monitor and see that, you know, we have ground, the mitigation that we put in is working, and hopefully our neighbours are seeing that we're taking this seriously, and we will continue to do this. And that's all I wanted really to add. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that excellent report. Questions? Tony?
Yeah, great. Thank you for the report. I like the fact that you had obviously the community stakeholder group as part of this process, which I think is important. I'm just wondering if there's any consideration being given to sort of formalizing something on an ongoing basis. And maybe this might help TransLink be a little bit more proactive in terms of how we manage this area, considering what Zanny said in terms of given the number of developments, number of services, that this is going to be an ongoing issue. So something to consider is, I don't know, call it a noise management committee, where you have technical people, you have resident associations who volunteer to sit on the committee. Obviously you would have TransLink staff. I think it's also important to maybe incorporate officials from the cities that are primarily impacted, because their residents are probably going to them complaining about it. So if there's a framework where I think the people can sort of get together, you can report on noise complaints, you can report on different technical issues, etc. And it might be a way to sort of engage the community and have an ongoing framework for the community to sort of participate. Because I think a lot of this is, the more they're aware and the more they're educated, I think the better they're able to sort of handle. It's only when they don't think they're being listened to, or they're not being sort of dealt with in a serious fashion, I think you have sort of more concerns. So there may be a way to sort of to manage this maybe on a more proactive basis going forward.
Thank you. Larry?
I really agree with that last point, and so I'd just like to reinforce that. The other thing I hope you might do, thinking more over the long run, because the fact is that transit-oriented development is the way that this region is going to develop. 100%, that is the way it's going to develop. And so it is an ongoing problem, and I really agree with your holistic approach. But there may also be something that can be done on the other side of the equation, which has to do with perhaps higher noise standards for construction adjacent to transit lines. In Vancouver, on major streets, we have a higher construction standard for noise levels that are acceptable inside. It's led to triple glazing, enclosed balconies, and even the requirement for air conditioning in some buildings, because you just can't, you can't realistically open your windows. And I think it might be good if we had a regional standard agreed upon by all the municipalities for those sites that are right adjacent to areas where, because of curves or whatever, we know that there's probably going to be some kind of noise issue on an ongoing basis. I think that just might help. And the final thing I wanted to say was I wanted to also endorse very much the advisory committee that you're going to use. I just think we have to get a lot of citizens more understanding of the situation, and we have to get our staff more understanding of the public's levels of acceptance and not acceptance of these things. I mean, I know that it's true that we do less grinding maybe because we have a bigger system, but maybe what the public is trying to tell us is we need more grinding equipment, and over the long run we need to change our own standard with that. And I think that comes through this advisory side of the equation. I think if you're just left to deal with the complaints as they come in, it becomes it's just too spotty and not strategic enough. And I think that they can help us, and I really appreciate the program that you've got there. I know when I was chief planner in Vancouver, it was a big issue among people, even to the point of when we were planning areas, how do we plan those in regard to the system. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Marcella?
Thank you. I just wanted to add, for those who weren't at the committee meeting, one of the other things we discussed, in addition to different standards relating to noise, was a question of disclosure to those purchasing or renting or leasing in the areas where they are, which we don't have in our region, certainly nowhere in Canada. Do we have any kind of rules or laws about? Versus, by the way, California, where you have to disclose your garbage night, when your garbage cans being picked up by the local people in terms of noise. We don't have anything like that here. So just again, to those who weren't here, we did discuss other ways, upstream as well, so that people don't find themselves in a situation where, oh my gosh, I bought something that's right on top of a railway track. I didn't actually realize that. So.
Great. Anything else? We will look forward to the feedback and all the information that you learn from this study, and curious as to how many devices you're putting on balconies, etc., to gather all this data. Yeah.
Thanks.
So thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. All right. The next item on our agenda is Jeff Cross. We get to see Jeff a few times here today, and he's going to talk to us about ridership update. So welcome back, Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very optimistic times in regards to ridership, so it's really satisfying to be here providing this update. I'm going to dive in a little bit more detail into kind of what we're seeing happening across the system right now, and the importance, obviously, the connection to the investments that we're making and the timing thereof, and then open it up for any questions. Kevin talked about the overall boarding rate that we're seeing right now and how that's increasing so rapidly. Fairly, even unprecedented for us, I would say, and we've had very sustained ridership growth through the 2000s, but we were averaging more on sort of 5%, so being up 6% is even a bit anomalous to that. Now there's some reasons for that about pent-up demand and other circumstances kind of colluding, but that's really important. So we're up across all modes with the exception of West Coast Express, which was anticipated because of the substitution factor regarding Evergreen extension, and that there are now some new options for some of those riders. But that is down about 6%. Now that's stabilized. We're waiting to see what September looks like, but roughly we saw that drop fairly immediately after Evergreen opened in December, and it's remained roughly in that sort of 4 to 6%. Our long-term projections for West Coast Express, because of population and employment growth out in that corridor, are still very significant over the next 20 years, so on the 50 to 120% range right now. So still anticipating that there will be increases there. But Skytrain obviously that's very significant growth. Vivian talked earlier about how many people they're moving there. Actually, Sandy and Vivian just talked about some of the rationale, and I'll dive into that as well. Services are one key component of it. This is the overview, as you're aware of the Mayor's vision, and we have implemented already half of what was in the phase 1, including services across the region. We'll provide you that next time with exactly what's rolled out so far, but it's been extensive, and that's a key piece. The timing has been right and continues to be right to get the supply out there, both to shape demand and encourage latent demand, as well as actually serve what was already there and bursting at the seams. There are a number of other factors. BC's economy is extremely strong. That is one of the biggest correlations and causal factors actually for ridership is employment growth, and that's been sustained over the last couple of years, so that's really helped. Fuel prices, the cost of driving continues to be fairly high, with the exception maybe of some of the tolls in that particular corridor, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But relative to transit, which our prices continue to be fairly attractive, very attractive, I would say. Even with the increase that we did have on July 1st, that was still only in the 2 to 3% range compared to what's happening with gasoline and other costs. It remains a competitive advantage for transit. And then I mentioned we've been able to get a number of those services out in a timely manner, and that's probably responsible for a third to a half of what we're seeing of the ridership this year is really about the service levels is our best guess. This graph is to try and dive down and provide you a little bit more detail about where the kind of really strong growth is happening. I was struck by the fact that the graph that Sandy and Vivian showed about where noise is happening overlays a lot of those pieces, and obviously the two things are related. Where there's really strong housing starts and condominiums growing at a disproportionate rate, we're seeing more station activity. So this happens to be areas that are over 10% year over year. And what you don't see on there is Evergreen, and that's because it hasn't been open for a year. I'll give you a little bit more detail on that. But very strong across south of the Fraser. That's partly because of housing starts, partly because of the service. A lot of service has rolled out south of the Fraser. And then on the commercial Broadway corridor, there's a lot of growth there as well. And then Marine, you see a big spot there on Cantaline where Marine Drive, Marine Station has been growing rapidly, and that's been supporting growth there, as well as even out into YVR. There's been very strong tourism and more use of that station. So this is really great. We're able to do this on a week by week, month by month now with Compass data, and be able to validate that with automatic people counters. But it allows us to kind of understand what's happening, and then also adjust where our service plan should be going, and understand what the relationship between housing starts and usage looks like, especially around transit-oriented development around those stations. So on Evergreen, Evergreen is a success story, I would say, and there was a question earlier by Marcella about what's happening there. What we're showing here by comparison is Canada line is the dotted blue line, what we saw for the first year of growth on that, recognizing that there are seasonal elements to all of this, as well as kind of the ramp-up period that's happening in the background, and other things about the economy, weather, etc. So it's hard to read exactly into it. But you can also see that in Evergreen line, the drop around the holidays and snow season, but that happens. But definitely the snowiness changed all of our ridership during that period. But you can see a gradual ramp up over the course of the spring, a drop as one would be expected, maybe a little bit more in the summer period than what would be experienced on Cantaline, partly because the usage is a little bit different, the patterns there, but then a very strong tick up in August and into September, so that we're now up about 28 or 30% over our opening week. So we're getting up closer to the 40,000 boardings on a weekday now. So we'll be tracking that very closely to see what happens, but we're really encouraged by the pattern that we're seeing there. The other piece is the new service areas. So these are the areas in Maple Ridge, 2 routes that we put out in Silver Valley, in Morgan Creek and Clayton Heights, in Langley and Surrey that had not had any transit service previously. We're tracking those very closely. In the Surrey and Langley routes, we're seeing about 300 boardings a day as of the week 3 for those 2 routes, and they've been growing over the first week, so that's really important. Those are 300 boardings that probably weren't being made on transit at all, given that it was very hard to access it. So 150 people or whatever are relying now on transit that didn't have that. And a similar figure combined just short of 300 for the Silver Valley and Maple Ridge routes. So we'll be watching those. We'll be adjusting our marketing and our information campaign to make sure that people are aware of those and seeing how they grow. We've got a number of others outlined for the next investment plan prospectively as well, so these are really important pieces. One other thing I would say, there were questions about what the impacts of tolls have been on the bridge crossing, since we're talking about ridership as well. We will be watching closely what's happening on Skybridge, so what the Skytrain boardings from Surrey into the Burrard Peninsula and back. Our models have predicted, based on the change in tolls and relative price, that we would see maybe about a 4% drop over when things settle out, against what otherwise would have happened on crossing. So we'll have to see that. As Kevin said, because of a lot of the background growth, the 555 is still looking very strong, as is Skytrain, but we'll have to be able to separate out what those patterns are. When we look at the three bridges that really work together, Golden Ears Bridge, Portman Bridge, and Patello, it is early days. Those things are settling out. But in overall magnitude, there are, as of last week, or earlier this week, there are 33,000 more trips a day being made right now, crossing those three. It's a little bit, there's some drops on Alex Fraser, just marginal, as one would expect, and maybe a little bit on Massey Tunnel. So overall, I think we're about 27,000 more trips across the Fraser River. That's about 7% of total. It's about 14% increase for those three bridges. So when we see these anecdotal stories of people having longer travel times, that's something we're going to have to watch. How does that resort? What does that mean for transit usage as well, and congestion levels? So it's something we think it'll take a little bit of time, but not nearly as long as, say, when you put tolls on Portman or you really added capacity. This is just about a price adjustment, so we should have it start to level out, I think, in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Jeff. Murray.
Thank you, Lorraine. Jeff, on the service additions to the communities that you showed on the last slide, are they FTNs?
No, those are our basic 30 to 60 minute frequencies. So these are areas that had no service at all, not even coverage service.
And those are all routes that have been lengthened, have they?
These are new routes.
They're actually new routes.
These are the 4 new routes that were actually put in as part of the actual investment plan. The rest were investments in overcrowding on routes that already existed. So as well, we put out Burke Mountain in December as tied to that phase 1. So 5 overall. I think there are 11 in total, or 10 in the mayor's vision over 10 years that right now don't have service and need to be addressed.
Right, and so the intention is to monitor the service that we do provide to see take-up rates and determine whether increased frequency would be warranted or not over time. Is that the objective?
That's right. Do we have the supply matched to what the demand is? Now we know that there are certain thresholds that we wouldn't go below, and it looks like the productivity levels are warrant those from what we're seeing right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Larry.
Being a Vancouver booster elsewhere in the country, how do these numbers compare to other systems around the country? Do you do tracking of that at all? I mean, are we across the country all getting more into transit, or is it really because of the service improvements and the other things here in British Columbia?
As far as large cities, like sort of cities with over 1 million boardings, of which I believe there are 11 in Canada and the United States, we're the outlier right now. So other than Montreal, others are actually losing ridership right now. There are a number of factors for that, some of which we don't have in place right now, and we need to really understand, and we're trying to get that. TNCs, so ride hailing, is in place in a lot of those major cities, and they are capturing a certain market share that comes from transit, whether it be somewhere in the 20 to 30% of their market share is what would have been transit trips. And now there are some benefits depending upon where that is in the system, you know, for the rider, but it's something we need to take into consideration for how we plan our capacity and as well as our revenue. Mentioned the economy. The economy's been incredibly strong here, so that's helped in this uptick, as well as because we hadn't rolled out any expansion in about 8 years, we did have some pent-up demand. But we're also seeing that I know my colleagues went to Railvolution down in Denver, and when we talk about transit-oriented communities, the scale of which we're doing in Vancouver is at a much higher and more intensive level than any of these other regions. We're also in a place where right now we're able to expand the system at the time that we're seeing both strong population and employment growth. So we are the 24th largest by population region in Canada and the United States, and we have the 8th highest ridership. So we're swinging way above our weight in that regard. That would be on a per capita basis. We're way above. So 8th in total ridership boardings on a daily basis.
Thanks.
Good news for us. Yeah, yeah. Any other? Tony.
Maybe not a question, but just this information is pretty gold. I mean, I think given, for example, when you sort of layered the noise complaints, when you layered the density in terms of ridership and the green spots. So the only question I would have is if we invited, say, 5 transit agencies that have had Compass for maybe 5 years, would they be doing what you're doing in terms of tracking all this stuff? And would there be any merit in terms of having them maybe, meeting with them and just to get a sense in terms of whether, what the trends are, or in terms of whether there's any learnings they can learn from us, or whether there's any learnings we can learn from them in terms of their what's actually happened there.
Yeah, good questions, Tony. So there's a couple of pieces in there. So there's what we do with Compass data to help inform our accountability and our planning. And we do share information. We have an ongoing, several times a year, association with both Metrolinx and AMT in Montreal. And so we're kind of able to share what we're doing. Now Montreal's had a smart card for a while, but they have not been able to kind of employ it the way we have for data purposes. And Toronto and Metrolinx and with their Presto card are just getting there, so they're playing catch up. But they do great other analytics, as do a bunch of systems. So we really work collectively, and we try and share that with larger properties, whether it be San Francisco or MTA as well, to kind of understand what they're doing. I think we should collaborate more to kind of see what's going to happen with Smart Card as far as understanding how that impacts ridership. And clearly when we go to open payment, that will be the next step too, to kind of see how that changes patterns.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate all that information. That was well done and very informative for us. So that concludes our agenda. Oh, Janet, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll be succinct. We're all stars.
Please go ahead, Janet. I'm sorry.
I'll be quick. Yeah, I want to be very succinct, right? So I will be giving the report on behalf of Jim Chu from the Governance and Human Resources Committee. I'll just confirm that we met on September the 19th. Lorraine and Giardini and myself were present, and just some highlights from that report. We reviewed changes to the organization's respectful workplace policy, which is a corporate policy requiring annual approval to ensure compliance with current legal requirements and human rights. Key changes include some new language around gender identity and expression being included as protected grounds, and also to the definition of sexual harassment. The committee had some very thoughtful, I think, recommendations for language changes to increase clarity and transparency, and that will come through in due course. We also received the semi-annual privacy management report from our privacy officer, Jennifer Johnston. I can confirm that all of our public-facing privacy policies are being reviewed on an ongoing basis to ensure compliance. And there's 3 key areas of oversight that are part of her report. She reported on our privacy impact assessments, which we undertake for all new projects, and major changes to existing programs that involve any kind of personal information. We reviewed a list of breaches under our privacy management plan, and I confirm that there are no major issues or ongoing concerns. And we also had a report on reviews that are currently being considered by the Office of Information and Privacy Commissioner. There's one that I think the board would be aware of, and of course that relates to media coverage in August about the Compass card data being released to police. So that review is underway. I understand that staff have provided a response to the Commissioner a couple of weeks ago, and that's well in process. There's also an internal review of the Compass card statement. We discussed a process for annual board evaluation, which you will all be receiving a request to participate in this fall. And we received a quarterly report from Jean Wong, our VP of Human Resources. Two things I would draw to your attention. One is our employee engagement survey had excellent response, 44% response rate, and the engagement result has increased 8% since our last review. So it went from up to 64%. So that's a very positive result. And also, I think for the record, I'd like to note that TransLink is BC Top 100 Employer for 2017. So that's something I think that will be helpful in marketing the organization as an employer of choice. And my final comment would just be that we've had a big job, I think, as we've heard, with respect to the recruitment of transit operators. That is on track. And there's been a very good marketing campaign underway to attract a broader demographic, and that's resulted in a 53% increase in applications. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, and excellent report, Janet. I'm so glad that we got to hear it. Any questions for Janet on her HR report? It was so perfect. I know it was perfect. It was
nothing if not responsible.
All right, so on that, can I have a motion to adjourn our meeting? Thank you, and all in favor? Thank you all very much. So to those who stayed through to the end, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you in December.